turn the floor over to Brad and run the show how you want, Brad. We're here for you and we'll do whatever we can to help you.
Cool. Well, thank you, Jayla. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to start calling Steve the mad scientist. I like that. I like that. For those of you who have not met Steve George yet, he is a wonderful, wonderful person. He and his wife, Brenda, brought Earthkind to the world, oh, shoot, 25 to 30 years ago now. And we're going to talk about some of that history today, but I jokingly tell Steve, and he's not here to defend himself, which makes it even better, that he was part of our Oklahoma outreach program. But now he's past his 90 days, so we can't get rid of him. But, he's been an extension for like 40 years. So he's a good guy. The materials that you're seeing here are actually based upon some of his presentations over the past few decades. As Jayla said, myself and some other agents across the state are really trying to bring Earthkind back to the forefront of landscape education. We are trying to freshen it up a little bit, maybe change a few concepts, or at least rephrase some concepts for a newer audience, maybe a newer audience that has a shorter attention span, or they've got different priorities. But many of the issues that Earthkind was devised to address absolutely still apply here. I'm in North Texas. Wherever you guys are in the state, Earthkind will apply because pretty much all of us are dealing with similar environmental issues. Okay, so a couple of housekeeping things before we get carried away with Earthkind. I really want you guys to be asking questions. Even those of y'all that are at an office, sitting around one computer, designate somebody to type into the chat. I need you guys asking questions. Part of this presentation, it's designed to start a discussion. We're probably going to talk about herbicides and pesticides at some point. We can start that fight. I like having that discussion. I want y'all to stretch your brains. But we can't do that unless we get some good questions that roll in. All right. We are going to have some regular breaks. Give you guys time to stretch your legs. Give me some time to stretch my legs. But I have a feeling we should be wrapping up probably by noon-ish, something like that. If I get carried away and we've been sitting here for an hour, somebody flag me down and say, hey, we need a break. That is cool. It's not going to bother me one bit. A little bit about my background. I've got a bachelor's and master's degree from A&M Commerce in agricultural sciences. Really, it's forage agronomy. So my background is in growing grass to feed cows. So when I look at landscaping, I tend to think about it through the lens of an agronomist, which I still haven't managed to turn a profit in my own landscape, but by George, I'm trying. But I tend to look at things through that lens of cost versus outcome. How much money am I putting in and what am I getting out in return? Now that concept can go beyond cost. It can turn into labor, it can turn into effort, it can turn into brain power, and it's really going to be fundamental to Earthkind. That thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and what you intend to do to get there and whether or not that is a good decision. Okay. So it's been an interesting journey for me coming from the pasture land back into home landscapes. But I'll tell you, I do a lot of lawn care presentations, and really the only difference is you mow a pasture with a cow instead of a lawnmower. Grass is grass, plants are plants, and they all kind of need the same stuff. So that works. I am a planty person. Yeah. So there you go. All right, let's get rolling. This is Earthkind Sustainable Landscaping. That is me. So let's talk about what Earthkind is. And there are many definitions out there, but this is the one that I like to use the most. All right, let me get it shared so you guys can see it. There we go. That's me, Earthkind Sustainable Landscaping. Let's talk about it. So what is Earthkind? Earthkind Landscaping promotes balanced landscape ecosystems. It is a landscaping method that encourages balance in a landscape, that conserves water and protects the environment through the judicious use of landscape irrigation, pesticides, and fertilizers. Okay. We are trying to protect the environment. We want to conserve water, protect air and water quality. And we do that through limiting the amount of irrigation that we use, limiting the amount of pesticide, limiting the amount of fertilizer we use. That does not mean that we go no irrigation, no pesticides, no fertilizers. No, that's not what Earthkind is. Earthkind is using those tools appropriately in the amounts that we need to accomplish the reasonable goals that we set. Okay, that's often where there's a little bit of a misconception with Earthkind, is that it is rigid. It is absolutely the Earthkind or the highway. No, for if you put out fertilizer, you are wrong. That is incorrect. If you apply a pesticide, whether it's a herbicide or an insecticide, you're wrong. No, that is incorrect. If you are watering your plants, you're wrong. No, that is not correct. Earthkind is using those resources and those tools appropriately to accomplish the appropriate goal. You just have to think a little bit. Okay. Why did Earthkind come about? Here was our chief environmental concerns. Number one, and guess what? It's still at the top of the list, wasting irrigation water. People are still pouring irrigation water down the drains. The number one source for wasted irrigation water is lawns. Does that make lawns the devil? To some people, yes. But to others, like myself, no, they're part of our landscape ecosystem. We can manage our lawns and be water wise and conserve water. It can be done. Absolutely, it can be done. But there's a method to it. So we want to try to stop wasting that irrigation water. We keep building lakes up here in North Texas, and we keep adding mouths that want to drink it and landscapes that want to drink it. So we've got to continue to find ways to preserve that resource. The second environmental concern was the misuse of fertilizers and pesticides. As much as the press and different media sources would lead you to believe that agriculture and farmers and big agriculture are the source of all pollution, I hate to burst that bubble, but it's homeowners, guys. Homeowners in their landscapes are the number one source of over-fertilization and over-application of pesticides. And a lot of that stems from there's very little oversight to that. Now, myself, if I wanted to go spray a herbicide like 2,4-D, which is a selective broadleaf herbicide, it's been around donkey's years. It was developed sometime during World War II. If I wanted to go spray that oxen type herbicide on my pastures to control the weeds so I could grow more grass and grow more cow, I would have to have a private applicator's pesticide license, which means I have to sit through the initial training. I have to go take a test that says I understand the material. Then I have to take continuing education units to prove that I am continuing to learn about how to use these products, how to safely apply them and not damage the environment, and so on. Yeah, Brad, as the homeowner, I can go to Home Depot and buy a quart of 2,4-D and nobody bats an eyeball because it is not regulated for homeowners. That's problematic. Many of the mistakes that homeowners make can absolutely trickle down and impact our food production systems. Misuse of pesticides that causes environmental damage that winds up having those products removed from the market. That can impact agriculture. That can impact our ability to produce food, which is going to raise our grocery prices. And there's a lot of hungry people around the world. So we've got to be cognizant of how to use those fertilizers and pesticides. Steve George will tell you that the way you stop a homeowner from misapplying a fertilizer and pesticide is don't let them do it. I'm back a little bit from that, and I realized that, heck, if I told my brother not to fertilize his Bermuda grass, he'd just hang up on me. So we've got to teach these folks how to do it correctly, and try to minimize the need for it so they can still have the results they want, but reduce the chances of potential pollution, okay? We also notice that we've had a decline in beneficial insects and pollinators. Kind of goes hand in hand with the misapplication of pesticides. If we're busy fogging neighborhoods for mosquitoes, which there are reasons for that. I'm not saying that is wrong, but there could be other ramifications of that sort of thing. All right. See, I'm trying to get you guys thinking. I'm trying to pick fights. I like being controversial. But if I'm spraying my lawn for bugs every month, I'm trying to get rid of chiggers in my yard. Is that necessarily a responsible approach? Could that product that you're applying, that broad spectrum insecticide, be damaging the beneficial insects and the pollinators that we have in our landscape environment that we need? When you think about these things. So through EarthKind, we're going to try to bolster those populations, protect them, and increase them. The last one is guess what, guys? We're building lakes. We're also building trash mountains, which is what I call landfills. We send a lot of compostable waste to the landfill every single year. It costs tax dollars to get it there, and it takes space. We want to try to reduce the amount of organic materials that are going to the landfill that we could recycle back into our landscapes that would build stronger soils and overall stronger landscapes. Okay. And we'll talk about some methods that we do that. When I teach lawn care, the simplest thing you can do is don't bag your grass clippings. It's as common sense and as simple as that. Don't bag your clippings and throw them in the trash. Mulch them, leave them on the lawn. Okay. It's little concepts like that if we all do that sort of thing, we can have huge outcomes. So let's talk about the goals. Number one at the list is water conservation. Water conservation. We have got to reduce the amount of landscape irrigation that is required to have an attractive landscape in the state of Texas. And I don't care if you're up here in North Texas, you're in East Texas, where the East Texas rainforest, which it's not, I get it. Or you're down south in the valley, or you're over in El Paso. We are trying to conserve water. We are only creating more humans, and those humans need places to live, and we like plants. So we're going to keep using water. We've got to be more efficient with how we apply that water. And that's a major component of EarthKind. We also want to promote the best available plant genetics that are able to thrive in our harsh Texas climate. So those first two, they go hand in hand. How do you conserve water? Well, you use the strongest plants that don't need a lot of water. How do you do that? Well, you do trialing. You do plant trialing across the state, and you see which plants are able to live in an EarthKind environment with minimal inputs. And we do that all over the state. I've got a little bit of few slides about that much later on, but that's not necessarily my particular strength. Okay, but it's a huge component of EarthKind. We also want to increase plant diversity within our landscapes. Fun fact, you can buy Burford hollies in numbers less than 30. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you can. Same with yopons, and other, other shrubs you see in builders grade landscapes. We want to try to increase the variety of plants within a landscape. Biodiversity in a landscape encourages biodiversity in our wildlife, including our pollinators, including our beneficial insects. That's a major part of our next bullet, which is to increase and protect pollinators and other beneficial insect species in the landscape. They have to have a place to live. So we need to vary up the types of plants that we're using, which guess what? Will also have the effect of our landscapes will look prettier. If you go to my neighborhood in Greenville, there's about 5 different species of trees. And that's it. There were like 6 or 7 different shrubs you might get. And I think if you were every third house, you might have something that blooms. Okay. We've got to fix that. We really need to fix that. We need to bring more blooms to a landscape, variety of color, shape, form, so we can have that variety in our wildlife. Okay. Reduce the use of fertilizers and pesticides. We use way too much. And I'm saying we as homeowners, generally speaking, we overuse fertilizers, we overuse pesticides. Okay. We're going to talk about that later on. And then reduce compostable waste and entering the landfill. Compost. Use those materials in the landscape. And I have another bullet that I did not include in this presentation. It's sort of gone on it, come off of it, gone off of it, and come off of it. But it's a concept that I want you guys to have in your brain as we go through this. And I believe a goal of EarthKind needs to be redefining the expectations of a landscape in Texas. Okay. Should our lawns be emerald green at the end of August if we are watering appropriately? I would argue no. If you have a lawn that is deep, deep emerald green and it's 1,000,000 degrees outside and it hasn't rained in months, we're probably using too much water. Now, I'm not asking you to self-identify, guys. All right. But if we're trying to conserve water, reduce our fertilizer pesticide applications, we probably need to rethink what our landscapes are supposed to look like at the harshest time of the year. Okay. Now, I'll tell you, it can be done. You can manage a lawn and still have it look very nice. It's not going to be perfect, but you can do that in an earth kind manner that's going to reduce the opportunities to damage the environment. Okay. And we can make up for any of the detractors that say, well, if my lawn's looking ugly, you can distract the eyeball. We boast that plant diversity in our landscape beds. We're going to make up for any of that with our very hardy, drought tolerant, beautiful plants that we have available in the state of Texas. And we have a huge plant palette. I am not a huge plant materials person, but we have a tremendous number of native and adapted plants to fill our landscapes that'll support our pollinators and beneficial insects that don't need fertilizers, that don't need pesticide applications to survive, and they're going to look gorgeous. Okay. So those are our goals of Earthkind. I need to pull the chat up real quick to make sure nobody's talking to me. That's okay. We'll keep rolling. There it is up top. Cool. I'm pulling up over there. So let's talk about it. Environmental protection, the Earthkind way. The overarching goal of Earthkind is to preserve and protect the environment. Okay. I broke it out into the micro, but the overarching concept is to basically stop doing stuff that's going to hurt Mother Earth. All right. And that environmental protection encompasses two very, very important aspects. Number one is that conservation of water. We do that through Earthkind soil management. We do that through the use of drought tolerant plants, mulching, and drip irrigation, efficient forms of irrigation. We also protect our air and water quality. That is the reducing the number of fertilizer and pesticide applications that we are doing in our landscapes. How do you do that? You select plants with superior genetics that thrive in an Earthkind soil that don't need those applications. Okay. Combined, all that wrapped up in a nutshell is how we keep our water bodies safe. It's how we keep our air clean. It's how we protect the environment. All right. What we're really going to talk about today is probably going to be common sense to most of y'all. Okay. It is a practical approach to landscaping. Earthkind took the best of all aspects of landscaping and put it together, whether it was organic or conventional. It didn't matter. Steve and the Earthkind team were looking for the best approaches to landscaping, and they rolled that up, and that became Earthkind. I think about it as think about what you're doing before you do it. What are you trying to achieve? Is that goal even achievable? This is where Brad's agronomy brain comes back in, where if, for instance, I scouted cotton fields when I was an undergraduate. And fun story. I don't know what it is about the microclimate of cotton fields, but they have this magical trait that if a breeze is coming, and it's coming, and it sees a cotton field, it just takes a hard right and goes all the way around. It's one of the hottest places I've ever been in my life. But I was scouting cotton fields. I was looking for pests. I was mostly insect pests, and I was looking for some disease, but it was mostly insect pests. And I was literally out there counting. How many flea hoppers did I see? How many bollworms did I see? How many eggs of bollworms did I see? And then determining, is it worth the money to apply a pesticide? One, is it even necessary? Is it going to be unprofitable to do so? Or on the flip side, am I out in this field that is so infested and the cotton looks terrible that the goal of trying to clean it up is not even achievable in the first place? All right. So it's that thought process of where do I want to be? Here's how I think how I'm going to get there. Can I get there? And is that responsible? The chigger example I gave earlier. There have been a lot of people who spray their yards for chiggers over and over and over and over again, and they keep having chiggers. Well, is it very responsible to continue to apply a pesticide to try to solve a problem that doesn't seem to be solvable? I would argue no. I'd argue you just need to protect yourself with a repellent so they can't get on you. Okay? That's Earthkind. It's that extra little step. Think about what you're doing before you do it. Now, that concept of scouting, that's IPM. And the foundation of Earthkind is working with nature rather than against it. And you do that using integrated pest management. Okay? Rather than try to fight Mother Nature, work with her. Work with the tools that are already in place to achieve your goals. That's integrated pest management. Now, TDA, they have a much drier definition of integrated pest management. I'm going to read that to you guys now. Hold on, sip of coffee. Got to stoke it up. So integrated pest management is a pest management strategy that relies on multiple pest control tactics, including the judicious use of pesticides informed by accurate identification and scientific knowledge of pests, reliable monitoring methods to assess pest presence, preventative measures to avoid pest infestations, and thresholds to determine when corrective control measures are needed. We're going to break that down. Don't worry. And you guys can have that memorized by the first break. Multiple pest control tactics. That encompasses a major part of Earthkind. Okay. That could be choosing the right plant. That could be building a good soil so that you don't have a plant that is struggling and more susceptible to pests. Judicious use of pesticides informed by accurate identification and scientific knowledge of pests. Being able to go out in your garden and tell good bug from bad bug. When I was scouting cotton fields, while I was counting pests, I was also counting spiders and lacewings and assassin bugs and minute pirate bugs and other beneficial insect predators and arthropod predators that are actually eating those pests and making that it's the where is it here? Thresholds to determine when corrective control measures are needed, making that assessment of, are the critters out here eating the bad critters doing a good enough job? Are they taking care of the problem for me? And you do that with reliable monitoring. You've got to be out there and look where you can assess, do I have a pest problem? Is it actually a problem? If you have, I'll throw this out here now. I think we'll talk about it again in a couple slides. But if you want to have a predator in your landscape, doesn't have to be an insect predator, okay? It doesn't have to be a spider or something like that. It could be a lizard or a toad or a bird. You got to have something for them to eat. You cannot have predators without prey. So with that in mind, if you want to see those other animals, you've got to have some pests in your landscape. That is okay. In fact, that is encouraged. That is having some pests and having some predators is a major part of the balance that I talked about early on. You've got to have some, and you kind of want them all the time. And then we get into our preventative measures. Okay. Whether or not you actually need to deal with a problem. Through Earthkind, you can build a landscape that's pretty much going to take care of that for you. Yeah, there may be some times you need to step in, but the goal is you should not be the one stepping in all the time. You should have a landscape that's relatively maintenance-free, that doesn't weigh heavily on your brain, that takes care of itself. And you can absolutely do that. And I don't care where you are in the state, you have a plant palette that will do this. Okay. So that's IPM. We're striving for balance. We're thinking long-term. We're not doing Band-Aid fixes. A Band-Aid fix is, oh my gosh, I've got aphids on my tomatoes. What do? I'm going to go to the store and buy the jug of 7 and I'm going to hose my maters down. That's not a long-term fix. You guys can throw this in the chat. Has anybody ever done that? And a couple days later, it feels like you've had more every aphid in your county has come to your garden after that treatment. Has anybody ever experienced that? I know I have. I know my mother has. Well, maybe when I went out there and hosed that plant down with carbaryl, I also hosed all my ladybug larvae, all my lacewing larvae, all the critters that were out there eating those aphids already. So we've got to be careful. We're trying to get balance. We are trying to have some pests all the time, and we have some predators all the time, but you maintain a predator population that can keep that pest at a manageable state. What is your threshold? That's really up to you. That is really up to you. Okay. Oh, Lisa says she loves her anoles. Then you're going to really love my next slide. Okay. We'll go ahead and go to that. You want to utilize your natural predators and cultural practices to manage pests. If you want to have anoles, you have got to have something for them to eat. Beetles, caterpillars, other creepy crawlies. You've got to have them in your landscape. So that equates to you need to welcome wildlife into your landscape. That's where it is supposed to be. Now, listen, if you want to have a zero tolerance policy for creepy crawlies within the confines of your home, knock yourself out. That is how my house rolls. Okay. Brad scouted cotton fields. Brad really doesn't like spiders anymore. Brad stuck his face in so many spiders' webs, he's surprised he's not dead. Okay. And what that is equated to, I don't want them in my house. Sorry, don't care. You live outside. You don't live inside. All right. Now, if my wife gets home and she finds the spider and it doesn't surprise her. That's the major thing. Look, if it comes out and is like, hey, I'm over here, please put me outside, it's going to live. Now, if it startles her, it's toast. That is fine. That's an example of a threshold. All right. And I would even say that is an example of a reasonable threshold. That is the inside of my house. I've got two small boys. Owen's 4, Reese is 2.5. They're curious. They're going to poke around. I really don't want them getting bitten by a big old wolf spider. Yeah, long term, it's not going to cause any lasting damage or anything like that, but it's still going to hurt. I don't want, heck, roaches are another great example. I'm talking the big, like, huge honking roaches. We want those things outside. They play a major role breaking down materials. They're part of nature's recycling process. If they get into your house, they probably made a wrong turn. All right. Sorry, guys, you made a wrong turn. Sucks being a bug. That's okay. That is absolutely okay. All right. So if you're treating your house to control pests in there, earth kind, put the earth kind stamp on it. I'm cool with that. But that same threshold of, and I'm going to go ahead and put the big E on it, that threshold of eradication should absolutely not apply outside. We should welcome nature in our landscapes. That's where it is supposed to be. We're supposed to provide habitat for birds, bees, butterflies, other wildlife. How do we do that? We increase plant biodiversity. We try to select plants that are going to offer food and shelter. So in addition to having, those blooms for pollinators, which everybody seems to everybody loves pollinators. Those that don't, they hide under rocks. All right. But pretty much pollinators get all the love. All the other beneficial species, they're kind of the unsung heroes. You've got to offer them stuff too. A lot of times that's shelter. Food sources might be fruits of some of our plants, seeds, berries. There's our pollinators, nectar and pollen. But it's also good to have some balance in there where, I made a joke about Burford hollies. They offer a heck of a lot of shelter. They're evergreens. They are a constant source of shelter within a landscape. So even that has its role. Understand, and I believe me, I'm not trying to get you to fall in love with creepy crawlies. But understand the role and the importance that they play in a landscape. Insects are critical to not just backyard ecology, but really ecology as a whole, because they are able to link. I'll just go ahead and read the bullet. They form crucial links in food chains, and what that means is in a fragmented landscape. Guess what, guy? We've paved the prairie. We've cut it up with roads and parking lots. We've built houses on it. That's fragmentation, and it is difficult for higher forms of life, like, and I'm not thinking so much of our winged friends like birds, although they can struggle as well, but mammals, toads, lizards, our little smaller walking creatures, they can struggle to move in between those fragmented pieces of landscape which equates to, when we're talking food chains, it's difficult to move energy. It's difficult to move actual calories in between places. That doesn't really apply to insects. They are incredibly adaptable. Insects, for instance, they fly, so they're highly mobile, and they can move vast amounts of energy from place to place. And that energy, which, surprise, everything comes from the sun. All of our energy comes from the sun. When it gets to Earth, plants take that energy along with nutrients from the soil, and they create sugars and proteins and other stuff like that. Then you have insects and other stuff that eat those plants, and the energy keeps moving its way up to higher levels in the food chain. Okay, it's part of the reason I love plants. They're magic. I can't photosynthesize. If I could, I'd probably be a little thinner than I am right now. But plants can do that. That's magic in my eyes. But insects play a critical role of getting that energy from plants to those higher forms of life that people tend to love a lot more. Our birds, our frogs, our lizards, our stuff like that. So insects might be the key to preserving wildlife as our world continues to fragment. Where I am here in Collin County, and I'm sure many of you guys all over the place can say, yep, I've seen that. I make the joke, the most profitable crop in Collin County is houses, and we're planting them like crazy. The big tracts of ag land are being cut up into smaller pieces. They're getting cut up into little ranchettes. That's fragmentation. We're continuing to fragment our natural world. Insects can be crucial to maintaining those food webs as we do that. Okay, without insects, the world would look an awful lot different, guys. Many plants rely on insects for pollination. I think I saw a statistic one time that said 1 in 3 bites of food comes from something it comes as a result of insect pollination. I don't really want to cut out a third of my diet. I mean, look at me. I really don't want to do that, guys. I'm hiding the rest of myself down here. All right. But insects are critical to that. We are one of those higher levels in the food chain. Okay. Without insects, the world would be an awful lot quieter. I'm sure I've got a lot of folks that just love birds sitting in the room out there. Well, they need something to eat. If you want to bring birds to your landscape, that doesn't just mean put out a bird feeder. It means have some creepy crawlies out there that they can supplement with. Okay. So the goal, and here we are bringing it back to Earthkind, the goal is not to eradicate. It's to manage. Eradication is not the answer. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Emerald ash borer, and I'm no expert on emerald ash borer, but it is an invasive species. It is not from around her. That is a goal that should be eradicated. That is an invasive species killing our ash trees. Yes, we should eradicate that. Pine beetle, killing our pine trees. It's an invasive species out of Asia. Yes, we should eradicate. Boll weevil. Yes, we should eradicate. What was it? Mosquitoes that carry malaria. Yeah. But the sow bugs that are living in your landscape, the roly-polies? No. The crickets that seem to come out in force after a rain in the summer? Yeah, they're irritating. No, we shouldn't eradicate them. Yes, they're annoying when you're camping and they won't shut up, but we shouldn't eradicate them. They are part of our ecosystem. All right. So that's our foundation of Earthkind, is working with nature rather than against it, using natural controls to help manage our landscape. Most of those are going to be those natural predators that we have, and using plants that are naturally resistant to pests and resistant to disease. We'll talk more about plant selection here in a little bit, but that is our foundation that we have built for Earthkind. Now, the next part of Earthkind, and we're gradually building a house here, guys, are the twin pillars: soil management and Earthkind plant selection. The two go hand in hand, and you can have the best plant selection in the world and build a lousy soil and have a plant that struggles. And you can build the best, most productive excuse me, healthy soil out there and choose a lousy plant, and the plant will struggle. You've got to use the two in harmony. So when Steve and his lovely wife Brenda were thinking about that, they thought about how Mother Nature manages the floor of a mature hardwood forest. Now, I will tell you right away, as someone that lives in the Blackland Prairie, emphasis on the word prairie, uh, we're not supposed to have a lot of trees here. Now, we've planted a lot of them because we've planted a lot of houses. But that doesn't matter. I'm just teasing at this point. But we're trying to emulate nature's recycling. All right. And there's nobody out fertilizing the forest. When you guys are driving around your home county and you see a natural area off the side of the road, and it's going to have, heck, you might think it's a giant mess, but you look out and you see some trees, you see vines and shrubs and some grass and stuff. Nobody's taking care of that. Why is it managing to grow? Why are there trees that are 30 and 40 feet tall? Nobody is out there managing them. Nobody's fertilizing them. Nobody's out there spraying them. So how do they do that? So Steve and Brenda thought, well, okay, well, what happens on the floor of a place like a forest? Or, and this is where my prairie brain comes in, what was happening in our prairies? Well, the soil is basically mulched year round, whether it's with leaves, twigs and branches, or in the prairie environment, it would be all those grasses that would lodge over and essentially do the exact same thing. Yeah, you're gonna have, guess what? There's other dead stuff, dead critters. They gotta land somewhere. They're gonna be on the floor. They're gonna break down and return those nutrients back to the soil. As those materials decay, they are going to replenish organic matter in the soil. That feeds the microbiome, and that releases nutrition back to our plants. Soil is nature's recycler because soil houses the microbes and the critters that do that work for us. Okay. So let's look at this picture here. This is where you guys are going to need your keyboards. What do you see in this picture? What do y'all see? Throw some stuff in the chat for me. Don't be scared of having a wrong answer. Trees and leaves? Yep, good answer. Different sizes of trees? Yep. Little bit of grass. Yeah, there's some little bits of let me find my pointer here. Laser pointer. Yeah, over here, there's, yeah, a little bit of understory grass or something that looks like it could be something different, but yeah, some kind of something, ground cover. Path where the water flows. Bet you nickel, you're right. Yep. Trees and grass. The slope. Ooh, I like that. You've got a slope, got some topography built in there. Ooh, sun and shade. Yeah, got some dappled light. Yep, 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 yep. Cool, cool. Good answers, guys. Good answers. So, anybody who, let me get my laser pointer back out. Did any of you guys notice that thing right there? That dead limb, or maybe even a dead little sapling or something like that. And this is kind of unfair, but like that right there. The only bare ground is where the humans go. Ooh, I like that idea. I like that an awful lot. The only spot that isn't covered, the only soil that's uncovered is the pathway where there's traffic. Okay. Now I'll tell you, as a cow person, my cows do that too. So it ain't just us. But yes, so that the soil here in this forest is covered all the time. All the time. All right. Now, as a soil person, which I am a soil person through and through, I teach soils for a lot of master gardener groups around the state as well. Bare soil is unhappy soil. All right. It wants to be covered with organic materials. It does not want to be exposed. Now, in a forest like this, it is. It's going to be covered with all those things you saw: vegetation, dead leaves, dead branches. Once that thing finally falls over, it wants to be covered. In a prairie, it's going to be covered with grasses and vegetation and that dense mat and stuff like that. But it's covered. At the soil surface, underneath those materials, decay is happening. That's where the recycling is going on, and we're improving our soil performance. So through EarthKind, are you doing that in your home landscape? Does your home landscape look like that? No. Most of us know. Yeah, you might live in a thicket somewhere, but most of us, like my house, I do not have a forest planted out front of my house. So I don't have a natural source of organic material to cover my soil naturally. So I need to step in. So with EarthKind, we improve our soil structure by adding organic matter. We go ahead and do that as landscape managers. We work in some organic matter in the form of compost because we're trying to build pore space. All right. Pore space is the area in our soil that holds water, air. It's the space where roots grow. It's the space where animals live, microbes live. If you don't have pore space, you do not have thriving plants. Okay. If you don't have pore space, you do not have good root systems. And happy roots equal happy plants, right? If you have happy roots, you will have an unhappy plant. If you have no roots, you have a dead plant. All right. So you've got to have a healthy soil. Healthy soil has pore space. That can be difficult to achieve, especially I'm a Blackland Prairie. I've got Blackland clay soils. They'll compact as hard as this table that I'm sitting at. All right. Organic matter is critical to building a healthy soil structure. All those materials that are sitting on the top, those mulching materials are going to break down. They're going to compost in place. And then things like earthworms and other beetles, ground beetles and larvae and stuff like that will move those materials through a soil. Okay. I'm not here to give you guys a soils class. It's hard to teach EarthKind without doing that, but I'm trying real hard not to give y'all another soils class. Okay. So we want to add organic matter. It's just organic compounds. It's bits of dead stuff. Okay. From if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or pick your favorite retailer or nursery, you're going to be getting composts, humus, or manure. Humus, not hummus. Hummus goes on a pita cracker. Do not put humus on there. That's a very different experience, okay? And you won't forget it. AgriLife Extension, we recommend fully finished plant-derived compost, okay? That's what the research was conducted with. Manures can be a wonderful source of organic matter. Understand there's some questions that you need to ask first. If you are buying your manure in a bag from a retailer, it's been pasteurized. So you should be good there. It should also be free of any persistent herbicides. So you should be good there. If you are getting your manure from a producer, you need to ask them what herbicides that they're using. Okay. There are some herbicides out there. We're going to go ahead and talk about them and then we'll take a break. There are some herbicides out there that can be sprayed. Anybody ever heard of Grazon Next or Duracor? They are very persistent in the soil, which is a wonderful tool if we're controlling weeds in a pasture. But that herbicide can actually survive a trip through the cow, come out the back end of the cow. You could spread that manure on a garden and still control weeds. It'll still be herbicidally active. Okay. So you need to ask your producer if you're going to be buying manure if they've used any of those products, because you don't want to use that in your garden. Okay. If they have, you just take that manure, put it in a pile somewhere and let it get rained on, let it compost, let it break down, and let that herbicide gradually decay, because they do. Herbicides decay over time. They degrade from sunlight, from moisture, and they lose their herbicidal qualities. Okay. And different herbicides decay at different rates. Okay. If you ever have a concern that you may have some manure that has some herbicide in it, you're worried about it, get you a pot, put some potting mix in it, mix some of that compost in there, and plant a tomato. The tomato will let you know if there is some herbicide in it because it'll die or it'll exhibit symptoms. Tomatoes exhibit herbicide damage incredibly easily, readily. I swear you can wave a jug of 2,4-D at a tomato and it'll start to curl up on you. So you can always check that manure and see if there's an issue. Do it like that. I highly encourage you. Okay. So just be aware. They can have some issues. They can also be very salty. If it's raw manure, so if you're going around the pasture and picking up fresh stuff to spread out, that is raw. It hasn't composted in any way. It might be kind of salty. Um, the soil, water, and testing lab down in College Station, in addition to testing soil, they will also test manures. There's a special form for it. Don't send them your manure with a soil testing form. That'll make them very angry. They kind of like the warning before they open the package. Okay. But you can have your manures tested if you're concerned about that sort of thing. All of these, they're a source of organic matter for our soil, which plays a major role in quality and fertility. Doesn't do a thing for structure or for texture. Soil texture is just the mineral compounds that, we're talking sand, silt, and clay. Those are just the mineral portions of a soil. That's purely based upon size of those mineral particles. When we start talking quality, soil structure, soil fertility, we have to talk about organic matter because it plays a absolutely critical role in determining how productive a soil can be. Hey, this is the fuel for your soil. You are feeding your soil. Soil is a living, breathing thing. It needs water, it needs air, and it needs food. Compost is your food. Organic matter is the food. Pore space allows the water and air to get in there. It's living, breathing thing. Treat it that way. It will pay off for you. So organic matter is your fuel. It's a long-term nutrient source for our plants. I don't necessarily want you to think of compost as a fertilizer. Okay. We're thinking much more long-term than that. Yes, through Earthkind and through the Earthkind research, we have showed that many perennials, including roses, our salvias, that when we build an Earthkind soil through adding organic matter and mulching it year round, we'll talk about that in a minute, we have been able to reduce the need for fertilizer applications down to zero. Okay. So is it a true fertilizer? Not really. I don't, as an agronomist, no, I would not call compost a fertilizer. But you can build a system where the plants will perform with what they have, what they are able to recycle, get out of this organic matter. I'm struggling with the words to convey that. Maybe they'll come to me later on. But it really comes down to you add that organic matter, you mulch, you choose the right plants, and you let nature do the rest. You work with nature and you trust it to work. And it does. We've got examples of Earthkind gardens all over the state, and it works. Okay. So real quick, I'll tell you about fully finished plant-derived compost, which I still think needs to be a Master Gardener bumper sticker. Just an FYI, that's a fundraising opportunity for you guys. That means when you buy a bag or you make your own at home, no large chunks of undecomposed material. If it looks like it has mulch in it, it shouldn't. Large chunks of material take a long time to break down. We don't want that. Okay. Should be dark in color, almost black. Otherwise, just a very, very, very dark brown. Really shouldn't smell like anything at all. If it does, it should have that kind of earthy smell that most gardeners really love. Some people don't like it at all. They think compost stinks, but most gardeners will smell it and go, oh, that just smells like healthy plants. All right. If the compost stinks, there's something wrong with it. It's probably not finished. If it smells like rotten eggs, that's a problem. You need to get a different product. Or if you're making your own at home, you need to start troubleshooting and see if maybe it's out of balance or something like that. When you take some dry or almost dry compost and you rub it between your hands, let it fall. You should leave your hands, and these are Steve George's hands. He's a wonderful hand model. I don't know if he's added that to his CV yet. But you should just have humus left in the cracks of your hands. Okay. All humus is, it's just organic material that has broken down to a point that it resists further breakdown. Okay. It's as small as organic matter you can get before you start having to break it down chemically. Okay. Guess what? And I'm assuming there's some other parents in the room here. So when I ask you, how important is your nose at determining whether or not something's wrong with one of your children? It works the same with cows and plants and gardening. I cannot stress, if your compost smells bad, something's wrong. Don't use it. If it stinks, go with a different product. don't put it in your garden. It's not ready to be used. Something is wrong. Use your schnoz. Also, fun fact, if you are at like a home and garden center and you want to be left alone, just go bury your face in a bag of compost. They will leave you alone. All right, trust me. Let's see how many slides. Okay, we've got a few more, then we'll take our first break. So, how do you get that organic matter into a system? Well, if it's a new landscape bed, that's pretty easy. A new landscape bed or a new garden, new raised bed garden, just till it in. Put out 3 to 6 inches of compost and till it in as deeply as possible. All right. If you're, say, working in an existing landscape, my wife and I bought a house 5 years ago. It came with a landscape. Wasn't very good, but it did come with some plants that we didn't want to tear out. You just apply that 2 to 3 inches of compost on the soil surface. Don't try to till it in. You don't want to disturb and damage that root system. Plants really don't like that. Okay. They don't like having their roots messed with. So you just put that compost on the soil surface. Think that the forest, that material is composting on the surface. Natural processes are going to work it deeper into the soil. The same thing will happen here. Put the compost on the surface and let Mother Nature take its course. I also recommend adding compost to gardens in between growing seasons, whether you're in a raised bed or in ground. Pretty much anytime you're going to be working that soil to put a crop in, you can go ahead and work some compost in. All right. In permanent landscapes, we really just want to do that once. We want to work that organic matter in one time, and then the rest of our organic matter is going to come from mulch year round. So shredded leaves, shredded hardwood mulch, shredded twigs, some grass clippings. You can go overboard with grass clippings as a mulch. All right. Earthkind recommends shredded hardwood. Is Earth? I'll get that question in a second. Shredded hardwood mulch is what we used and recommend with Earthkind. Shredded because you want it to knit itself together. When you have large chunks of mulch, and I'll tell you, I buy the cheap mulch at the store. I've come out with like a fence picket out of a bag before. It was a piece of pallet, I think. But when it is shredded, it will knit itself together in sort of an airish brush pile type thing. When you have large chunks, that's when you start to see it float and lift off. And we don't want that. The goal is to cover the soil and protect that soil and then stay in place and compost in place. All right. So we want it to be shredded. 3-inch layer is ideal. Any more than that, and we can actually start to trap too much moisture. And at least where I am, where our soils don't drain worth a darn, we start seeing root rot problems and things like that. So 3 inches is ideal. Don't mulch directly up against your plants. Mulch is incredibly good at preserving soil moisture, and you don't want to trap that moisture, I'm going to use my coffee cup, directly against, say, the trunk of a tree, because you could wind up rotting that bark off and causing fungal problems, and it can be harmful for plants. I tell people to leave a space around all of their plants because you don't want to trap that moisture directly against it. All right. Every year, you're going to top the mulch back up to 3 inches because you want the mulch to break down. All right. A couple of questions real quick. Is Earthkind no dig? Yes and no. Okay. For permanent landscapes like perennial beds, perennial landscaping around your house where you're not putting in annuals and things like that, you've got your rose bush, you have other shrubs, things like that, I would call that no dig. Once you have laid that material, that compost down, and you have mulched, you leave it. And all you do is top the mulch back up because we don't want to disturb that natural process. If you're doing an in-ground garden, can you do that as no-till? Yes, you could. Can you do it as traditional tillage? Yes, you could. So that's a management decision for you. What's going to work best for your situation? If you are going to be tilling, I encourage you to work some compost in every time that you till. Okay. If you're in a raised bed garden, where traditionally those soils are going to be more friable and easier to work with, because it's going to be mostly container mix as opposed to native soil. Um, you probably aren't going to have to get in there and do any kind of tilling. You're just going to be able to work in that one spot. You may not need to do, stir the whole thing up. If you do, go ahead and add some compost when you're doing that. Um, then let's see here. What's another scenario? Um, the goal, and this is a phrase I've heard before, the goal is to compost once and mulch forever. But that's really when we're talking about permanent landscaping outside of a home, areas where you're putting in permanent plants that you're not going to be digging around again. In our gardens and things like that, that's a little bit of a different scenario. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question, Lisa. Lisa, if you need more, shoot me an email, or maybe we'll bring it up again in one of the breaks. Is hardwood better than pine? To be honest, I don't know that there's any research to say yes or no to that. I'll tell you, outside of my house, I use shredded cedar mulch because it's the cheapest and I like the smell and the color. Shredded hardwood mulch is what was used for the trials. Um, I don't think, anecdotally, I don't think you would notice a difference. Okay. As long as it is wood materials, it is plant-based, and it's shredded, you should be fine. Okay. Again, I'm gonna let my agronomist brain come out. You can come up and you can have a plan, and I'm gonna go get XYZ materials because they're the best, and you're gonna get to the store and something is gonna be on sale. That is a contributing factor. All right. It's part of the contributing factor while I get the cedar. It is the cheapest. Okay. So avoid inorganic mulches. Now, I was in the Army, so I absolutely despise rubber chips because they put them in all the PT pits. And when it's 105 degrees outside, they'll glue themselves to you while you're doing push-ups. So I really don't like them. All right. But in a landscape, we really don't want to use them. Okay. If you want to use them in a walkway, like the red area there, I'm more okay with that. Still not super keen on it because they get hot. But you don't want to use them around your plants. They provide no nutrition to our soils. They hold heat, as I already hinted at. And we don't want to do that because that's going to reduce our moisture retention even further. You don't want to put a material down on the surface that's going to heat the soil up even further. Organic mulches cool our soils. They shade them and they help keep them cooler. In some instances, 20 or 25 degrees cooler than the ambient air temperature. That helps preserve soil moisture. It helps keep our roots happier, and that's a good thing. When folks tell me that they don't want to have to top up their mulch, that's the reason they're going to go with rocks or rubber chips or plastic shreds or something like that. Tough. We want to have to top our mulch back up. That is a critical component of building an earth-kind soil, is that breakdown and decay of mulch. We want that. So when somebody's arguing for inorganic mulches, it is not recommended. Leave them to our playgrounds, leave them to a walkway, don't put them around your plants. We want that breakdown. Ideally, you're going to get about an inch of breakdown per year. Try to disturb the mulch as little as possible. Has anybody ever come across mulch and it's got this white fuzz growing all over it? I'll tell you, a lot of county agents get calls about that all the time. And it's, oh my God, my mulch is rotting. Oh my Lord, it looks terrible. What do I do about it? And what you do about it is you cover it up with a little extra mulch. Okay, that's a good thing. That is one of our fungi that is breaking that material down so that microbes can break down the byproduct of that. We want that material to break down. So you don't replace mulch. You simply add more. All right. When you think about it, if you're going to be adding an inch of mulch per year, a 2 cubic foot bag of mulch, if you cut it up into inch layers, you'll get 24 square feet out of 2 cubic feet. When you do that math to top it up every season, every year, it is very, very economical. Okay. Last slide before break. Oh, no, 2 slides before break. Sorry. Don't forget our creepy crawlies. All right. Soil is our recycler. It's a habitat. I've already encouraged you to welcome nature into your landscape. You need it. Okay. Things like these pill bugs, these sow bugs, they are primary decomposers. They are eating these dead materials, whether it's wood or leaves or whatever, dead plants. All right. They're breaking that stuff down into manageable portions that microbes can work on to then release nutrients back into our soil, back to our plants. Okay. They are crucial to the breakdown of our mulches and other organic material. All right. We need them in our landscapes, so we need to be judicious with our pesticide applications. Okay. I got to hammer that home. Here's how you build an earth kind soil. We've already covered that. Compost once, mulch forever. Add at least 3 inches of high quality, fully finished compost. Top it with 3 inches of shredded hardwood mulch and maintain that 3 inches of mulch year round. Okay. It is as simple as that. All right. Let's go ahead and take a break. Let's see. It's 10 o'clock. Let's come back at 10:20. I don't know how many of you guys are in groups and sharing a restroom and stuff like that, but I'll give you all a pretty good break. Let's come back at 10:20. Um, and we'll talk about expanded shale real quick and answer any questions, and then we'll keep rolling. Okay. I'll see y'all at 10:20. All righty. We are back. So we're making good time, guys, too. So we're going to talk about a few questions real quick where we leave off. So what do I think about dyed natural hardwood mulch? Okay. I have absolutely zero problem with dyed mulches. Um, the EPA and other regulatory bodies have deemed that the dyes are not harmful to the environment. They're not dangerous. Um, the only thing that I don't like about the dyed mulches is that they start to fade. I've never been a fan of black mulch. I don't think that's aesthetically, I don't care for it. The red mulch, I'm still not a super fan of it. I like the look of the shredded cedar. I like that kind of orangey color as it fades, because even it fades too. It just kind of looks gray and natural. It doesn't look like an old painted building. Um, but they don't bother me. If you want to use a shredded mulch that's dyed, go for it. Um, it used to be, and I don't really know how true this was, but I know it was it was in the airwaves, if you will, was that black mulch had herbicide in it. Um, there are some mulches out there. The one that leaps to mind is by a company called Preen. And generally, on somewhere on the bag, it's going to say with weed block or something like that. And it has some herbicide with that product. I don't recommend using those products. I don't know how effective they actually are at stopping weeds chemically with that herbicide. Generally speaking, it's such a minute amount of herbicide. I can't imagine that it really does much of anything at all, which again, laying that over earth kind, what's the point of putting out a product if we know it's not going to do anything or it's going to have minimal impact? It's kind of a waste and irresponsible. Mulch itself does a pretty good job of smothering weeds. It can. It's not going to smother Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is tenacious. But mulch can be very effective um, if weed seed gets on top of mulch and it germinates, it's probably not going to establish because it doesn't have any soil to get into. So outside of that, I want you to use a shredded hardwood mulch or a shredded cedar, something like that. I don't care if it's dyed. It doesn't phase me one bit. How do you keep your dogs from eating the mulch? A fence. Are they actually eating it or are they just chewing it up? Because if they're just kind of chewing it up, the only solution I've ever found to that is to give them a stick that they can chew on. And so they have their designated stick. Um, Otherwise, to get mulch that doesn't have big, long, appetizing chunks to your dogs, I really that's the only solutions I can come up with. Keep them out of it or give them a stick of their own to chew on. No need for adding supplemental compost annually. So in a established, we're going to say an established earth kind landscape, you have plants growing, shrubs, bushes, perennials, things like that. You worked in 3 inches of high quality, fully finished compost, and you have mulched with 3 inches of shredded hardwood mulch. That mulch is composting in place all the time. You don't need to add compost after that initial addition because the mulch is doing it for you. You keep topping the mulch up year round, just like the floor of a hardwood forest, it's composting in place. That's why we say compost once, mulch forever. Now, in a garden, like a vegetable garden, where you're working those soils more often in between seasons to plant, that's where I recommend if you're going to be working that soil, go ahead and work some compost in while you're doing it. All right. But in an established earth kind landscape bed, no, you compost once and mulch forever. All right. How to use sawdust for soil preparation. Sawdust is one you need to be very careful with. Sawdust is something that I really don't recommend that goes directly into a landscape. It's incredibly dense. From a composting standpoint, which we're going to have a quick aside, this is not a composting class. But when you're talking about composting at home, it is a balance of carbon to nitrogen, of brown to green. And you need your carbon to nitrogen in a certain ratio, in a certain balance to get optimum breakdown. If you wind up with too much carbon, not enough nitrogen, it just kind of peters out. It doesn't have enough energy to compost. If you have too much nitrogen and not enough carbon, that's where you wind up with a stinky, sulfury smelling pile that's just, again, it can wind up very dense. It can wind up anaerobic. And when you don't have oxygen in a pile, it's going to start to stink. The bacteria that like that are the ones that give off bad smells. Okay. So sawdust is like 200 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So when you're trying to achieve like 20 to 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen or something that's close-ish, I don't have it exactly memorized. Adding sawdust to a pile can get out of hand very quickly. Adding sawdust to your soil, you're adding a material that's probably going to take a while to break down. So you just need to be very careful with how much you're using. If you have a wood shop, you do a lot of woodworking and you have a lot of sawdust, you can sprinkle some of that stuff around, but you're probably going to have too much to actually use in your landscape all the time. That's one of those things you're going to have to bite the bullet and probably send some of that stuff to the landfill, just because you're not really equipped to use that in your landscape. Okay. What else have we got? Is there a good time of year to mulch? Yes. Now, anytime. Mulching in general is good. Most people will do mulching in early spring or in the fall, or excuse me, around Labor Day, because that's when Lowe's and Home Depot and Ace put mulch on sale. Okay. But you can mulch really any time of year. All right. Is it true that hardwood mulch has more weeds? If you are buying mulch from the store, it should not have weed seed in it. That's sort of part of the laws that govern that stuff. You are not supposed to include weed seeds in that. Now, if you get hardwood mulch from something like Chip Drop, I don't know if you guys have that service wherever y'all are located, and you're basically just getting, or maybe your municipality will, when they do tree trimming, they will shred that up and drop it at your house. Maybe you'll have some weed seed in that, but really, you shouldn't be finding that stuff in hardwood mulch. You should not be finding that stuff in mulches. Cats love to dig in our mulch and poop. Any tips? A spritz bottle. Our neighborhood cats like to do that in my mulch too. And I will attack them with a super soaker with a little bit of like orange oil mixed in it or something like that. That's part of it. Sadly, remember I said welcome nature into your landscape. Yeah, that just happens. It happens in my neighborhood too. About the only time that it really gets under my skin is in the springtime when I'm getting in there to put in new plants and I happen to dig right where a cat's done its business. But otherwise, they've really just added some more organic material. So if it gets out of hand and there's a lot of it, really all you can do is just try to deter the cat. Water generally works really well for that. Can pine versus hardwood mulch help balance pH? Ooh, Connie, we're getting close to having a soils talk here. So where I am in the Blackland Prairie, and really across most of Texas that has alkaline soils, our soils are alkaline because of the amount of calcium that is in our soil. So our soils are formed out of calcareous material, highly calcareous materials. That gives us that elevated pH. Think of it like having loads of baking soda in your soil, which means if you apply any acidic material to them, it's going to get neutralized very, very quickly. You are not going to see a decline in your pH, a noticeable decline, or I'd say a noticeable decline, or even remotely close to a meaningful change in your pH from adding a pine mulch or something like that. There is no feasible, economical, lasting way to amend a highly calcareous soil to lower pH. It is not possible. The way you conquer pH is through plant selection and plant genetics. I'll go even further. So let's go into East Texas, where we start seeing acidic soils there. Those soils are also formed out of calcareous materials. However, they tend to be sandier in nature, so they don't retain nutrients, they don't retain moisture particularly well, and they tend to receive more annual rainfall than other portions of the state. What that attributes to is you can wash a lot of those alkaline nutrients out of the soil. Calcium is one of them. Well, if you are flushing that calcium out of the soil, you're going to lower the pH. So that lower pH we see in East Texas is more, I would attribute that more to rainfall and the climate than to the actual makeup of the soil itself. And that's not 100% accurate. That's not the whole story, but it's probably the simplest way I can put it. So in those areas, you can raise your pH very easily by adding lime. You're essentially adding a calcium product. Well, it's going to get rained on. It's going to get washed out of the soil over time. So it's going to revert back. In a clayey calcareous soil, it's sort of the opposite. You have so much calcium and so much nutrient and moisture holding capacity, you're not going to be able to lower that. Okay. If you want to grow something that requires acidic soils in an alkaline environment, you need to put it in a pot. You need to put it in a raised bed, get it out of our native soils where you have control of that media. Okay. The last example I have for that, and it goes into lawn care, which I don't know if you guys have covered that yet, but with something like take-all root rot, which is a major problem in my area, it loves alkaline soils. Okay. All right. Well, y'all can ask Potter that. All right. I think he's doing it right. Whoever's doing that, y'all can ask him about take-all. Yeah, ask Potter. Take-all root rot likes alkaline soils. So there was some research done, I'm wanting to say about 20 years ago, where we were looking at using peat moss to lower the surface pH, just the very surface of our soils, where that fungus is active, to help combat that fungus. It likes an alkaline environment. If we can turn that surface pH closer to neutral or make it slightly acidic, it can help us combat that fungal disease. We're not doing anything to the pH deeper in our soils. They are so highly buffered, at least in the Blackland Prairie and our calcareous clay soils, they're buffered so heavily, we're not going to have any impact on them. It's going to revert back. It's going to revert back very, very quickly. But when we're trying to just amend the surface, that's something that's more feasible. Okay. Y'all can pluck Michael's brain about that next week. Is it good to use leaves as mulch? All right. Last question and we'll get rolling. Yes, you can use leaves as mulch. They need to be shredded. Leaves, here's a good example on my desk. I don't know if you guys can see me, but leaves will often settle. Think of the stickies in a pad of sticky notes. They can actually settle and they can compact themselves, and you wind up with a fairly impervious surface to where water will run off. Remember, I mentioned with shredded mulch, you get kind of a beneficial brush pile type effect that's got porous. Well, that allows water and air in and out. Unshredded leaves, you can wind up with kind of a mat that doesn't let water or air in and out. The easy solution to that is go run over your leaves with a lawnmower. Suck them up with the bag of your lawnmower and mulch them, and then you can go dump them out from the bag. It's the easiest way. Just chip them up a little bit, break them up into smaller pieces, and yes, they can be a very good mulch. They can be a very good source of organic matter. Absolutely. Good questions, guys. Good. So the last component of an earth-kind soil, and this is the reason that I put it last, is expanded shale. And the reason I put it last is expanded shale is another tool, but it's not always required. Expanded shale is a one-time permanent soil addition for sticky, heavy clay. Only sticky, heavy clays. If you have a loam or a sandy soil, you can ignore this slide. All right. You're not going to need expanded shale. But if somebody has a heavy clay that's very highly compacted, holds too much moisture, expanded shale is sort of like permanent pore space, instant pore space you can work in. It is shale that's been cooked in a kiln. I think it's cooked at close to 2000 degrees. So it gets pretty toasty, and that causes it to puff. It's basically like rock popcorn. So it's very lightweight, it's very porous. I'll tell you, you can intimidate your neighbors because when you're out there shoveling the stuff, you can fling it miles and it makes you look like a beast. Okay. Um, Again, I stress this is only needed or potentially needed in a sticky, heavy clay. If you have a sand or you have a loam where you don't have a drainage problem, you don't need to be worried about expanded shale. Take whatever money you were going to spend on expanded shale and buy more compost with it. Get more organic matter. Okay. That's where I said in a sand, exchange that 3 inches of shale for 3 inches of compost. Okay. So let's say you wanted to add expanded shale into your earth kind soil recipe. Back up that slide. You'd add another step in here. So in step one, you'd add 3 inches of high quality, fully finished compost and 3 inches of expanded shale and top with 3 inches of shredded hardwood mulch. We kept it nice and simple, 3, 3, and 3. That's easy for homeowners to remember. Okay. But if you are in a sticky, heavy clay with a drainage problem, skip that expanded shale, add more compost. Okay. All righty. So let's talk about the second earthkind pillar, and that is earthkind plant selection. Now, I will go ahead and tell you at the beginning here, plant materials is not my strength. All right. I am a soils nerd and I like grass. Okay. I still love pretty plants and I love flowers. Okay. But I am by far not the leading edge of plant materials in the state. I will bow to some of my colleagues. But what I am qualified to teach you guys about is some of the overarching themes behind what makes a plant a good selection within an earthkind system. Okay. The goal is to recommend plants that are going to thrive in that earthkind environment. All right. They need to be able to withstand our Texas tough conditions. But what actually makes a plant capable of doing that? All right. Within earthkind, we do trialing, which I've got some slides on that here in just a second, where we test plants. We put them in an earthkind environment, turn off the water, turn off the fertilizer applications, don't apply any pesticides, and we see how they do. Okay, that randomized replicated research shows us what plants have the strongest, best adapted, most pest resistant genetics. You know that through trialing. Okay, yeah, there's some anecdotal and experiential evidence that all of you gardeners will have of seeing plants. Heck, you drive through. Greg Grant loves to do this in East Texas. You drive through and you see an old cemetery that nobody's touched for 60 years. And there's some beautiful flowering plants in there. He wagers that most of those plants might be pretty good fits within earthkind because they've been left to their own devices and they're thriving. Okay. And we need that. We need them to be able to thrive in an earthkind soil. With that, we try to utilize the earthkind plants that we already have trialed, as well as the superstar plants that are being trialed by some of my colleagues. And we also want to try to use our Texas natives. Now, I'll go ahead and jump right on out there. Just because a plant is native does not automatically make it good. There are plenty of native plants that really don't work well in a landscape, whether they're messy, they spread like wildfire, or they take over. Just because a plant is native does not make it a good landscape plant. Now, native plants are, I would say that we need to put native plants at the forefront of our landscape designs because they're the ones that are supposed to be here. They're the ones that are already adapted to being here. The wildlife, insects, pollinators that we have, they evolved alongside those plants. So and there's have been research to show this, that native plants will attract more native insects and pollinators to a landscape than adapted plants. That does not mean you go only native. You can if you want. All right. I want earthkind to be as inclusive as possible. Hopefully you guys have noticed that throughout here. I'm trying not to be restrictive. I want to welcome as many people to earthkind as we can possibly get on board. All right. So if you want to only use natives in your landscape, knock yourself out. It's going to be gorgeous. But there are many adapted plants that are beautiful and beneficial to our landscape ecosystem that can also be included. All right. So we have a huge plant palette here in the state of Texas. Use it, utilize it, use the plants that you want to use. And let's talk about them a little bit more in depth. So the Earthkind trialing starts with the American Rose Trials for Sustainability, the ARTS trials. And the goal of ARTS, which is ongoing, they are still testing this little petite rose here, which that picture doesn't do it justice. It's almost fluorescent red. Like it's one of those plants that if you look at it too hard and you look away, you're still going to see it for a little while. It's gorgeous. But the goal of the ARTS trials was to test the newest in rose germplasm. They were testing those newest genetics, and it was the first truly national study of its kind. It was literally coast to coast, border to border. There were trials. There are trials down here in Texas. There are trials up in Minnesota. There are trials in California, all the way over to the East Coast in Connecticut. All right. It is a truly nationwide study. And it constituted the first of the national Earthkind Rose trials. All right. So back in 2019, they had 15 sites, as I said, giving you that breadth and width of the study. And for over 11 years now, they've been scientifically growing and evaluating rose cultivars under low input conditions, essentially following the Earthkind protocols, which was 3 inches of compost, year-round mulch. You water these plants through establishment. They are never fertilized. They are never given any pesticides. And you evaluate them for their performance. How beautiful do they look? How many blooms? Do they grow well? What form do they have? What size do they get? What pests do we see? What diseases do they have? All right. I jokingly call it, we put them on hard mode. You get them established and then you leave them alone and you see how they do. All right. Because with Earthkind, we want plants that can tolerate our climate and still look beautiful and not need a lot of maintenance. All right. Steve George, he doesn't deadhead plants. He doesn't want to. I'm kind of a in the middle deadheader. Deadheading is something I do with a beer in my hand. So I'll go out and drink a beer and I'll just deadhead a little bit. And I'll do some every day. You don't have to. All right. The goal is to have a landscape that takes care of itself, that doesn't need that day-to-day maintenance. It doesn't need a lot of maintenance. Okay. So that's where we came from, the ARTS trials. Look them up on the internet. Look at their reports. They release a report every year. To our knowledge, Earthkind and the ARTS trials compose the largest program of environmental rose field trials in the United States. And I think they still do. Okay, this is the picture here on the right. That's actually out at Myers Park, north of my office. These are some of the research beds that we have. We've got Earthkind trials on annuals, perennials, evergreen shrubs and ornamental grasses, although I think I'm going to be plowing that under and doing something different, but we're talking about it. We have tree-form crepe myrtles, which if you want to see some Earthkind plants, go look at the crepe myrtles because they're gorgeous. And all we do is prune them once a year just to clean up the suckers and stuff. And otherwise, we leave them to their own devices on a hill and they're rocking and rolling. They don't need our help. Okay. We have an Earthkind herb trial. You want some Earthkind plants, herbs, which here you go. Quick aside. Oh, we've also got grapes. Anyways, let's say you have a family friend and their thumb, it's not only is it not green, it's kind of like a dark brown to black. Tell them to grow herbs, because if they can't grow a herb, then they know they need to try a different hobby. They growing stuff is not for them. They need to golf or paint or something like that. Herbs are a wonderful group of plants because they're tough as nails. They generally tend to be extremely pest resistant because of their oil content. Majority of them, think the Mediterranean herbs, they grow up on rocky, poor soils that are very low fertility. So they really don't want to be fertilized that much. If anything, in my area, herbs struggle because we get too much water. They're a wonderful starting point for gardeners, guys. They're easy. They're easy. They're resilient. Okay. So start them with herbs. Okay. That Earthkind herbs, man, they work like a dream. Now let's talk the Superstar program. Okay. And I think you guys probably have a section on superstars, whether or not you've covered them or not. Again, this is another statewide replicated research program, trialing plants. They've got research demonstration gardens in different ecoregions across the state. The goal, again, is to assess actual landscape performance and in garden settings. I think a part of the Superstar program, and they can correct me later on, actually includes some anecdotal evidence from other gardens around the state, what they are seeing. And you also get a marketability aspect to these trials. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how good a plant performs in a landscape. If we find some obscure phlox that is the gangbusters, it is the best earth kind plant we have ever seen, and you can't buy it anywhere, it makes it very difficult to recommend it to the public. These plants have got to be available for the public to buy. Otherwise, it's just very discouraging. So the Superstar program includes some marketability statistics or some marketability aspects. How well or how easy are these plants to propagate for nurseries? Are they economical to grow so that they can be marketed to the public at an affordable price? There are plenty of plants out there that are wonderful plants, but man, they are just difficult to produce. Heck, my master's work was in a native grass called Eastern Gamma grass. Go read my thesis. You'll probably be the first people that ever have outside of my committee. But it's one of those plants that it's very niche in our tall grass prairies. It likes wet areas, roadside ditches. You don't see it very often. Now, I'll tell you, once you've seen this grass, you'll never unsee it. But part of the issue with Eastern Gamma grass, and it does make a very good forage grass. Okay, cows love it. When they've got it, they will eat it. The problem is it's very difficult to grow from seed. It doesn't produce very much seed in the first place. And the seed that it does produce doesn't germinate well. Well, if you overlay that into something like the Superstar program or Earthkind, if I was a nurseryman trying to grow Eastern Gamma grass as an ornamental plant for people because it's drought tolerant, it doesn't want any water, it takes crappy, cruddy soils, which sounds great. But if 90% of my crop is going to fail, that's going to equate to me having to charge you, the consumer, an awful lot more. Not to mention, it's going to limit my availability. How much am I actually going to be able to produce? And that's not a recipe for success. So there are plenty of plants out there that are difficult to grow, and that makes them difficult to get out to the consumer to use. Okay. So the rest, almost the rest of this presentation for today is we're going to go through some basic Earthkind plant recommendations. And what I want you guys to look at are the different traits of these plants and what about that makes them a good fit within Earthkind. You're going to see a lot of similarities between them. Okay. And like I said, these are basic plant recommendations from your basic plant guy. Okay. Let's start with Henry Dulberg salvia. Salvia farinaceae. This is sort of the poster child for Earthkind. It's a beautiful plant, and I love salvias. I absolutely love salvias. They are tough as nails. They are drought tolerant. You can find a salvia of every shape and size and darn near every color. It is one of the few plants that you can go out and say, well, I want to find a pink one, and I want it to have this kind of bloom, and I want it to be about this size, and you can probably find a salvia to fit that. There is a salvia for all occasions. They're also a wonderful plant for starters because they're pretty darn tough. Most people that kill salvias kill them because they love them too much. They give them too much water. So Henry Dulberg, it is a perennial, so it's going to come back year after year. That's a good thing. That's sustainable. We're not going to have to plant something every year. We're not going to have to sink money and resources into establishment every year. It's native, also a very good thing. It likes full sun, but it can also tolerate some partial shade. So it has a fairly broad area that you can plant it. Once it is established, I'll go ahead and say that now. For our water demand, this is after establishment, okay? You're going to need to water these plants through establishment. If you don't, that's not a recipe for success. But once established, this plant has a very, very low water requirement. Okay. It may need a little bit of irrigation, as most of our plants will. We've had 3 months of drought. Our plants could use a drink. But for the most part, these plants don't require a lot of water, and they will bloom all season long, which means they're providing a food source to our bees, to our hummingbirds, to our butterflies. They're promoting those pollinators that we're trying to protect. And the other thing people don't realize is you're also going to be supporting things like beetles, flies. There are other predator insects that will actually go eat nectar because they use that energy to go hunt. So you can benefit our other insect species, things like wasps. They fall into that. Um, it, this is a plant, it can bloom starting in early spring. We had a fairly mild winter up here in Collin County. Our Dewberg started blooming at the very, very end of February. Like, they died back to the ground in the winter. Yes, they did. But they had already come up and put on this bloom, which is a good 6-inch flower spike. It's a big, tall flower spike. They were putting that on at the end of February, and they are still blooming right now. They'll bloom all the way up until frost. Okay. Um, Henry Dewberg's a big plant. This mature size of 3 feet wide by 2 feet high, no, they will get bigger than that. In ideal conditions, they can get bigger than that. We have some out at Myers Park that they'll fill a 6 to 7 foot space. They will also reseed and spread. So you need to be aware of that as well. Now, the neat thing about them, if they do, dig up a chunk and give it to a friend of yours. Dig it up, divide it, give it to people. For the most part, it transplants pretty well. Okay. But it's also tough. So if you need to be aggressive with your weed eater to keep it in place, go for it. Go for it. Don't be afraid of that. All right. Now, the next sage, autumn sage, good old Salvia greggii. When I say you can find one in every color, yeah, you can pretty much find one in every color. Okay. There's pretty much every shade of purple you could want. That hot pink one up top, lipstick. I mean, that picture also doesn't do it justice. That one will darn near hurt your eyes as well when you look at it. Wonderful hardy plant, sort of classified as a subshrub. Sort of think of like a 3 foot by 3 foot blob, forms a little woody shrub. The ones we had at Myers Park, they didn't go dormant in the wintertime. They lost some of their leaves, but they pretty much stayed going. These things started blooming in North Texas mid-February. We were already starting to see some blooms come on, which was great for our pollinators that were starting to come out. Okay. Again, another perennial. They're native here. They like full sun. They can survive in partial shade, but they don't bloom as well. Very drought tolerant. And again, wonderful for all of our pollinator species, blooms all season long, has sort of an upright form. And this is another one, you don't be afraid to prune it back. If it's getting too big, you can go ahead and prune it back during the year. It'll probably go ahead and give you a fresh flush of blooms. Okay. But if it's taking over an area, you don't need to be bashful. You can prune it back. If it's established well, it should tolerate that very, very well. It's a wonderful plant. Okay. One of my favorites, Salvia leucantha, and this is just your standard Mexican bush sage. There are other cultivars of this plant that are smaller. The full-size one, I have a 4 foot by 4 foot here. The ones that we have at Myers Park are probably close to 5 feet tall. They're almost as tall as me, and I'm just shy of 6 foot. And again, sort of 6 feet wide. This is a big plant. And it dies back to the ground every single year here in North Texas. Some of you guys down in the South, it may persist, but for us, it's going to die back every year. Don't worry, it shall return. Tremendous native here. This is going to be the plant in your landscape. If you have the space for it, I don't have space for it at my house. We're a triangle lot, corner lot of a cul-de-sac. Y'all get that geometry into your brain. We really don't have space for a plant like this. Believe me, if we did, we'd have one, because it is the plant that's you will hear it when you walk into your garden, because it's going to be absolutely covered in bumblebees, hummingbirds, honeybees, wasps, butterflies. You will hear it because it will be absolutely humming with life. Okay. It's not really going to start blooming until early summer. It's very upright plant. It's gorgeous. I absolutely love this plant. There are some smaller cultivars out there that you'll find it different. If you go to a Lowe's or a Home Depot, you tend to find the smaller ones. Like I think Santa Barbara is one of the cultivars of them, but there's a handful of them. Okay, wonderful plant, extremely drought tolerant, doesn't need maintenance, and it will set these blooms and do it all summer long. Wonderful plant, wonderful plant. Now, John Fanick phlox, named for the nurseryman John Fanick. Um, if you've ever seen a garden phlox with its head of flowers that's probably 5 to 6 inches across, John Fanick makes that look small. It's a perennial native plant here. It likes full sun. Wouldn't mind a little bit of shelter when we get into the dog days of summer when we're really brutally hot. Might need a little bit more of a drink than our salvias would just to keep it looking really nice. It'll survive if you don't baby it. But it's probably not going to look quite as nice as some of our other plants would be unless you give it a little drink of water. Wonderful for our bees and butterflies. This is a very upright plant. Our phlox are going to be more columnar. So it's going to give you a different shape, different texture in your landscape, allow you to layer. These things will get up to 3 feet tall. Most of the ones I see tend to be 2 feet-ish, but they'll get up to 3 feet tall. Okay. So not a small plant by Brad's definition. Also one of our Texas superstars. I didn't mention that, but you guys can see the superstar logos. I attached them to the ones that are. Wonderful plant. This is a plant that sometimes you'll struggle to find. I don't know that I have ever found John Fanick phlox at a Lowe's or a Home Depot up here in Collin County. I'll find it sometimes at nurseries, but even there it seems to be sporadic. There's another one called Victoria Blue that's a Texas superstar, and I don't think I have ever seen one of those available up here in North Texas. So that's problematic. But if you find one, consider adding it to your landscape. The wildlife will love it, and I'm sure whoever is enjoying your landscape is going to love it. Purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea. What I love about purple coneflower is there are versions of purple coneflower that are no longer purple. You can get different colors of purple coneflower now, which makes me happy. Another perennial, it's native, full sun. This one doesn't mind some shade, although if you want maximum blooming, get it in full sun, it can take it. Really doesn't need any water. Once it's established, it's good to go. Bees, birds, and butterflies. Now, I mentioned that Dr. George does not like deadheading plants. And I kind of do it because it's a hobby while I drink my beverage. This is going to be one of the plants that I don't recommend deadheading because it's going to set seed, and that seed is a food source for some of our songbirds. Okay. So this is going to be a plant that once it dies back and all you're left with is the stems and the seed heads, leave them. Don't remove those because you're removing that food source. Okay. They will also reseed themselves and they will spread. So they'll sort of recharge themselves as you lose plants. Yes, they're perennial, but they do die. I don't know how long-lived a perennial that they are. But you want to leave that seed head in place. Okay. They'll bloom spring through spring till frost, basically, and they're upright. An individual plant is not particularly wide. That's that 1.5 feet width, but they will get fairly tall. They'll get up to 3 feet tall. These are, again, not a small plant. So plan your landscape accordingly, and leave them standing until you're pruning back in the springtime. Okay, leave that seed in place for our bird friends. Okay. Now, the next plant, which I love this plant. I love it because it puts on these beautiful little hydrangea flowers. Guess what? They only bloom for a single day. Don't worry. It will have fresh flowers every single day. I have one of these rock roses on the east side of my house, and I don't think I've watered it in 18 months. It's one of those plants that it's next to a flame acanthus, which I don't know that I have in this presentation. And the garden hose really doesn't reach to where they are, it's a pain to get water to them. So as a result, they really just don't get watered. That's how Brad is. I'm shame on me. I'm mean to plants. Um, this plant can take over a landscape. Um, it is not particularly mannerly. This is where I don't know if you guys know Todd Williams, uh, Earthkind team member, ag agent over in Rockwall. Beautiful plant. He doesn't put it in his landscapes because it spreads like fire. It will reseed itself and it builds a shrub that's 3 to 4 feet by 3 to 4 feet. It will take over. Um, it's a perennial, it's native, it likes full sun, it can tolerate some partial shade. But if you get it in full sun, it will be tenacious. Extremely low water demand after establishment. All of our pollinators love it. I've seen hummingbirds fight over this plant. It's kind of fun to watch. I like watching hummingbirds fight. They are the angriest little birds I think I've ever met. Blooms all season long, spring all the way up to a frost. Wonderful plant from an earth kind standpoint. Water conservation, good for our, no need for fertilizer, no need for pesticide, good for our pollinators. Hopefully you guys have noticed that trend as we've gone through. These plants are very similar in their water demands and what they're good for and where they want to be. Hopefully you guys have seen that. But this is one that probably going to be on the upper end of management as far as keeping it where you want it. So when it reseeds somewhere, pull the sprouts out. Same with flame acanthus. If you have one of those, it'll spread too. Don't be afraid to hit it with the pruning shears. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful plant. No, good old yucky, 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 yucca. Wonderful earthkind plant, the yucca. Not one of Brad's favorites because, at least in North Texas, I feel like there was a 8 to 10 year window where everybody said, "Hey, we need a plant here. Let's put in a yucca." So they're everywhere. However, once they're put in, just forget about them. It'll be fine. It will be absolutely fine. They're a desert plant. In where I am in our clay soils, we tend to rot them off if you irrigate them. They just die of root rot because they don't want the additional water. It's another native perennial, full sun. It'll eat western sun for breakfast and not bat an eye. Water demand very low. Really, if you're in a clay soil, you probably don't want to water it because you're more likely to overwater it than anything else. Birds love it. Butterflies will love it. It'll bloom all year long. It gives a different texture. Todd is a big believer in different textures. This is going to give you that sort of grassy look, but also give you a bloom. Okay. It'll give you that sort of desert scrubby look when you're not necessarily in a desert scrubby area. Okay. So it's a wonderful plant. It really is. It's just not Brad's favorite. Brad's not going to put it anywhere around his house because he's tired of yuccas because they're everywhere. And if you say, well, I don't want a red one, good news. There's a yellow one out there too. I don't want one of those either because they're everywhere as well. All right. Yucca's not for me. And that's the great thing about Earthkind. We can have those differences. All right. And I think I hinted at this early on. Our plant palette is tremendous. When you look at the native and adapted plants that will thrive in Texas, you have a huge palette to choose from. So we may have gone through some of these plants and you look at some and go, wow, that like the rock rose, go, man, that thing kind of looks kind of messy looking. Don't plant it. Pick something else. There, believe me, heck, go get an autumn sage. You can get a pink one that's the same color if you want. That's cool. Rock on. That's sort of those differences in what we like is going to improve our biodiversity in our landscapes across our neighborhoods. I don't necessarily want to have the same stuff that my neighbor does. Okay. That's going to give us that diversity naturally and give us more beautiful, more attractive, more interesting landscapes that overall are going to be better for the environment. So those differences, we need to embrace them and rock on. Okay. Catmint might hold the title for best cultivar names. If you found one of these, and this is one of our adapted plants, okay, you'll find like Cat's Whiskers, Cat's Meow, and all little cutesy names like that. There's lots of different varieties out there. Walker's Low is the one that was trialed in Earthkind. There may have been some others trialed as well, but Walker's Low is the one we have at Myers Park. Looks an awful lot like a salvia from a distance. It is not, but it's small. This is a plant that probably isn't going to get much bigger than maybe 2 feet high, which is sort of rare in the Earthkind world. A lot of the Earthkind plants and superstars get pretty darn big. So in a smaller lot, you can run out of room. Catmint and the other catmints, they can form that sort of outside border, that lower layer that stays short, and you can put them out front. Full sun, partial shade, low water demand, good for all the pollinators, blooms summer to frost. Have you noticed the trend yet, guys? These are plants, low maintenance, that are good for the environment. They don't need our help. Speaking of don't need our help, Turk's Cap, which there's the red one, there's a pink one, and there's kind of I think there's a whitish kind of one that I'm not a super fan of because it just kind of looks washed out, but some people love it. This plant will grow anywhere, barring like the middle of a parking lot. But even then, I don't know that I would put it past it. If it found a crack, it might grow. A colleague of mine over at A&M Commerce, Dr. Daryl Harp, who's also a member of the Earthkind team, when he worked in the nursery industry, I'm sorry, I keep scratching my nose, guys. It's driving me crazy today. He worked at one nursery and it labeled Turk's Cap as full sun to partial shade. And then while he was visiting another nursery, he found Turk's Cap labeled as full shade. And he visited another nursery and he found it as a part sun, part shade. And everywhere we realized, yeah, it is growing in full shade. It is growing in full sun. It grows everywhere and it blooms everywhere. This is another one of our adapted plants that has come over and absolutely loves it here. It'll put on these little flowers that resemble a fez. That's why it's called a Turk's Cap. And it's wonderful for our pollinators. Absolutely wonderful for our pollinators. It'll bloom all season long and it'll do it anywhere that you plant it. Now, this is a plant because it reseeds readily. Once you have it, it's pretty much going to be there until you kill it with a herbicide. We've had to do that at Myers Park because it simply took over an area. And this is a large plant. I mean, it'll get at least 4 feet tall if you let it. So we had it in some areas outside of an office building with a sign where the sign was out front labeling the building. And every year the sign was gone because the Turk's Cap would just take it over. And we'd prune it back, cut it back, go wading in with the machetes, take it down. It'd come back for more. The way we had to finally get rid of is we dug a lot of it out. We dug the main plant out, but we had so many plants coming back from that root system, coming back from seed, that we finally just had to spray it to get it gone. Okay. And that's perfectly fine. Using herbicides, using pesticides when they are needed per the label directions is absolutely Earthkind. There's a time and a place to use those tools. This was one of them. Okay. So plant cautiously. We actually had a friend that gave us some Turk's Cap seed as a Christmas present. And we gave them to somebody else as a Christmas present because we didn't want to have Turk's Cap because, again, we didn't have a place for it. It's such a large plant, but it's wonderful. It's a wonderful Earthkind plant, wonderful Texas superstar. Gora. Oh my goodness, I love Gora. I think they are such a beautiful form of plant. When you have an area that you can put a Gora in where it's not going to be restricted by something else, do it. There's actually one just a handful of minutes away from my office. It's in a parking lot of a Kroger of all places. How that landscaping crew wound up with a Gora, I will never know, but I'm so glad that they did. They put it in a spot you'd typically find a yucca. So I'm very pleased. It's beautiful. It's about 3 to 4 feet in diameter and probably about that tall. And it looks like a cloud of butterflies. It's beautiful. There's even a cultivar called whirling butterflies, I believe. It's a native perennial, loves full sun. The one that I had in partial shade at my house didn't seem to like it, but there could have been some other stuff going on as well. Once established, very drought, very drought tolerant. It blooms very early in the year. This is one I have the seasons listed as spring and fall. If you get it some water in the summertime, and depending, I have master gardeners here that say there's blooms solid from spring all the way to frost. I had a white Gara that it bloomed early in the spring, looked pathetic for most of the summer, and then came out beautiful again in the fall. It could be that I didn't water it at all because I'm mean. I don't know. I don't know. That's just some of the stuff that I've seen. But it's a wonderful plant. It's a great source of nutrition for our pollinators early in the season. Okay, I would encourage you to work Gara into your landscapes as much as possible. Here's your texture option. So it's often been told to Brad, who's not much of a designer, that if you have nothing but blooms, you just get a bunch of blobs. So you got to add some texture. You got to change up your shapes and your forms and stuff like that. And thinking about your landscape as an environment, as a home, you've got to have some structure in there. And there are plenty of insect species and other, organisms that like having some grasses in place. At least where I live, used to be a prairie, used to have lots of grasses. From a landscape standpoint, Gulf Muley is a terrific option. It's a Texas superstar. It's native perennial. There is a white muley grass. I forget what it's called, but it apparently is darn near impossible to find up where I am. Again, the pink one is much more popular, the Gulf Muley here. I would say that the white muley might get lost in your landscape a little bit, especially if you have white stone on your house. You're just going to lose that inflorescence there. It's just not going to look. You're just going to lose it. You're just going to fade into the background. Very low. It doesn't need water. Once it's established, leave it alone. Once it's established, leave it alone. It'll do its thing. It's going to put out this is the bloom of the flower. It's called an inflorescence. It'll put out this starting in the fall. So right about now, you're going to start seeing muleys that look like this. For you guys down in the South, it may take a little bit longer, but don't quote me on that. It's a grass. It's going to give you a bushy, grassy, upright form. Okay. I would argue you don't need to have a hedge of grasses like this, but you can use them here and there in your landscape to give a different texture, break up the monotony of the different shrubs, the different blooming shrubs, and things like that. Okay. Now, these are just the tip of the iceberg, guys. What you should have noticed through those examples are drought tolerance, native and adapted, but they were all drought tolerant. Yes, we're going to need to water those plants when we're trying to establish them. Hand watering is best. You don't really need to be trying to establish plants using drip irrigation. All right. Once plants are established, using high efficient drip irrigation is a wonderful way of irrigating those plants. But really the idea with Earthkind is that we should be using what falls from the sky. I've spent an hour now teaching you guys how to build a productive Earthkind soil. We need to put that soil to work for us. Okay, that is our nutrient reservoir, our resource warehouse. Think of it that way. Your soil is going to store resources your plants are going to use throughout the season. All right, so that's the water and the nutrients that our plants need. Ideally, we're going to be using those resources throughout the year, coupled with plants that are not particularly nutrient intensive. That's where we are able to reduce the amount of fertilizer that we're using. Okay. Through our trialing efforts, we've been able to prove these plants don't need fertilizer applications to be productive. Okay. We found that when you put them in an Earthkind soil where there's plenty of organic matter and you're replenishing that organic matter through the decay of mulch year after year, they don't need to be fertilized to look beautiful. So what does that do for us? That's a fertilizer application a homeowner doesn't have to make. That is a fertilizer application that doesn't have the opportunity to go wrong, that doesn't have the opportunity to be misapplied, to make its way into our storm drains, to make its way into our waterways. While it was not part of the plant descriptions, I'll go ahead and tell you, these plants are also naturally pest resistant. When we were trialing, yeah, we found some pest damage on some stuff. Yeah, we found some, caterpillars will come in, they'll eat some stuff. Beetles will come in, they'll chew on some stuff. You may have some thrips and different, stabbing insects that are going to cause some damage. And we saw some aphids and things like that. But when you looked at the overall performance of those plants, they were fine. They were fine. And while we were finding those pests, guess what else we were finding? We were finding the predators out there as well. Okay. So we want long-term balance. We had the predators to help control the pest. If you want predators, you've got to have some pest. So we didn't apply pesticides. We didn't need to. There was no need to apply insecticides or miticides or something like that. Okay. Those plants are resilient. They're tough. Okay. Let's go ahead and answer the question. In Houston, struggle with building a drought-tolerant landscape that won't die during the times we get heavy rains. Tips on how to make multifunctional for drought, but also be able to push off heavy water. Okay. That, I will tell you, we struggle with the same thing up here. The answer to that is plant selection. And I'm not necessarily the person that's going to be able to help you design your way out of that. I'll tell you that right now. But what we are looking for with earth-kind plants are plants that are able to do just that. Okay. Now you can somewhat manage your soils to help deal with excessive rainfall. So let's think about, and I'm not going to go back in the slide deck, but let's think about when we're building an earth-kind soil. So you're starting out, let's say you've got a brand new area that you are going to build a landscape bed. First things first, you're going to go ahead and clear that of unwanted vegetation. If you have Bermuda grass, I recommend you use a systemic herbicide. Okay, something like glyphosate. Get that grass dead and gone, or it will be the bane of your existence for a long time to come. Okay, so you'll clear that area of the unwanted vegetation. Then you are going to till in at least 3 inches of good, high quality, fully finished compost. If you have a clay soil where you're located, maybe you're going to go ahead and till in 3 inches of expanded shale. You've just added 6 inches worth of material. So your soil where you are should be about 6 inches, probably even a little bit more from where you started. All right. Then you can crown that bed. That crowning a bed is where you gradually slope it from the center to the edge. If it's up against a house, you're going to want to crown it away from the house so that excess water is going to run away from your house instead of towards your foundation. That's going to help with some of that excessive rainfall. Okay. Because yeah, you're going to be inundated with water. You guys down there in Houston more than we are up here. But you'll get that excessive rainfall, but then you actually route it using topography. Think that somebody mentioned it when I showed you the picture of the forest. You had the pathway and somebody said that's where the water's going to run. You're sort of guiding that water with the shape of the landscape bed itself. So that's going to help with some of that deluge. You're getting the plants above grade out of that standing water. That's going to help. Now, the beauty is those plants are going to grow a root system that's going to get down into that underlying soil that you have not amended. With proper management, they will grow extensive root systems. That's how they cope with drought. That's going to help give you that performance whenever the droughty times do come. Is it a bit of a trade-off? Maybe. You're going to have to see. Maybe by building that bed, maybe you have to irrigate a little bit more. I would argue you're probably not going to have to, because you're still going to have that deep, extensive root system that's going to access the water that is being stored in your soil from that heavy rain times. Does that make sense? I'm going to talk about this, the next concept, but then I'm going to bow to some of my other more plant material hort agents and specialists to go into more detail on it. When you're looking at plants and looking at performance of plants, when you go to a nursery and you see a plant and it says on the tag, requires well-drained soils, that's an indicator it's probably not going to perform in a clay soil. Okay. And there's lots of plants that we see that with. Very few plants you'll see on the tag, I like it soggy and wet. Gamma grass is one. It doesn't mind being in standing water for a couple months. It'll be fine. But most of our plants don't like that. Most of them will you'll see it likes moist, well-drained soils. Shoot, I think if I had had a tag on me, Brad probably likes moist, well-drained soils. But if you see a plant where the verbiage is a little more aggressive, requires well-drained soil, that might not be the best selection if you know you deal with areas where you're going to have way too much rain. Unless you put it in a better drained spot. Maybe you use some more expanded shale to give it that better drainage, but the trade-off is how much moisture you're going to be able to retain when you go into drought. Okay, so there's going to be a little give and take and a little feeling your way along. We're going to conquer your problem through plant selection. Okay, and that's about as deep as I can really get into it without getting out of my depth. So hopefully that's not a terrible answer for you. Okay. What other questions do you guys have? We have plenty of time. I was telling Jayla before we got started that without teaching a soils class and without teaching a plant materials class, the concept of earth kind is fairly small. It's not a difficult topic. It is vast, yes, but the actual concept of it is relatively small. It's relatively simple, okay? So we've got plenty of time. Do you guys have any more questions? Be bold, be brave. All right, I'll keep looking at it as we go, So where we're going to wrap up with Earthkind is we're going to talk about some of the environmental victories. And these have come directly from Steve George, illustrating some of the results of the field trials that have been conducted across the state over the last 15 to 20 years. It's protecting us and protecting our communities. Ooh, superstar suggestions for shrubs. We're going to come to that at the very end, Brandy. All right. So field trial and research results. So first off, multi-year Earthkind field trials and research studies on roses, perennials, and tree-form crepe myrtles showed that cultivars with the superior genetics gave outstanding landscape performance with minimal maintenance. So you think about how I mentioned earlier that our crepe myrtles, if you want to see an Earthkind plant, come look at them because we don't do anything with them. That's that outstanding landscape performance. Now, the criteria for that is overall health of the plant. Is it blooming well? At a basic level, and this is something I love about horticulture, and I've come to love about horticulture, coming over from agronomy where I'm very yield focused. In horticulture, our yield is beauty and enjoyment. How do you quantify that? Good luck. But at a basic level, you walk out into a research garden and you go plant to plant. That thing is gorgeous. That thing is gorgeous. And you come to another plant and you go, that looks terrible. I don't want that in my house. And so on and so on and so on. And then you start breaking down, well, what about it made it good or made it bad? And you can count blooms and the vibrancy of the bloom and the quantity and that's and the size and all those sorts of things, which I'll tell you, when you're comparing a rose to a salvia to a catmint to a yucca, you start getting into comparing apples and oranges. All right. That's the difference where you can't necessarily do non-blooming shrubs and blooming shrubs because the blooming ones are always going to win because they're going to score more points. All right. So we showed with minimal maintenance, after the first year, turn off the irrigation or only minimally irrigated, no pesticides, no fertilizers, no fungicides, no miticides, and they looked gorgeous. The ones with the superior genetics. The only ones that I'm talking about in that statement are the ones that passed the trials. The ones that look terrible, They're not included in that statement. There were plants out there that didn't like it, that couldn't hack it, and we don't recommend those. Okay, does that mean that they are automatically a bad plant? And we're going to go ahead and say this. If I planted a hydrangea at my research gardens, it would probably die before I got it in the ground. I'm just saying. Does that automatically make a hydrangea a bad plant? No. It makes it a poor selection for our situation, for our environment, and for what we're trying to accomplish. Further east along the Gulf Coast in our acidic soils where you get plenty of rainfall, the soils are suited, they're adapted to those soils, completely different story. But in my area, highly calcareous, alkaline soils, heavy clay, poor drainage, hot, dry summers, that's a recipe for hydrangea hell. Okay. So just because a plant did not perform in this does not automatically make it a bad plant everywhere. It just makes it a poor selection for an earth kind landscape. All right. We had a 95% estimated reduction in irrigation. We had to irrigate through that first year, but 100% reduction in fertilizer and 100% reduction in pesticides on the plants. That complete reduction of fertilizer, that is massive. Okay. I'm not trying to hate on the fertilizer sellers. Okay. And again, we're not saying you do not use fertilizer, but with these ornamental plants, these perennials, roses, crepe myrtles, you don't need to use them. So that is reducing the opportunities for us to make a mistake, for homeowners to make a mistake, and potentially damage our water quality, damage our environment. That's the goal. If we can reduce the number of times that somebody has to use those products, that's better off. I'm exceedingly comfortable with pesticides. When I was an undergraduate, I worked in field trials. I've sprayed more pesticide, fungicide, insecticide, herbicides, all of the sides you can think of. I've messed with them. I am very comfortable with them. I respect them. Okay. You apply them safely. You use the proper PPE. You use them to accomplish the proper task. And that's fine. That does not mean that Brad wants to, that's it, in his spare time, enjoys going out and spraying. No, they are used when they're needed. Okay. And if we can reduce the need down to zero, I'm cool with that. That's saving me money. That's an extra trip to Roadhouse that I can take my boys and they'll eat their weight in rolls. That's great for me. Next field trial. Trials demonstrated that a year-round 3-inch thick layer of mulch recycled yard debris, so it was wood chips and tree leaves, served as a super slow release fertilizer. That translates to, that is that concept where is compost fertilizer? Is it not? I say it's not because fertilizer is much more short-term, where the gain is much more early on. This is long-term. We're building a stable landscape environment that's sort of self-sustaining. It's recycling itself, okay? Now, is it truly recycling everything? No, because we're not, yeah, maybe you mulch your pruning, your clippings and stuff like that and recycle it back in as mulch. Most people don't. So you are bringing in some material from outside in the form of mulch. That's fine. Okay. Improve soil tilth. As you increase organic matter in our soils, they will become easier to work. They become more porous. Some people will say they become softer. That's that soil tilt. They're easier to work. They become more crumbly, more friable. That's a good thing. That means it's easier for our plants to grow roots. That's a good thing. The easier it is to grow roots, the more extensive root systems we can grow, the more drought tolerance, the more resiliency we can build into our plants, okay? Mulch also moderated that soil temperature. Again, keeping our soil cooler, the microbes prefer it, the plant roots prefer it, and it's going to help reduce the amount of moisture loss when we get into droughty conditions, okay? Trash to treasure. So imagine the large-scale use of recycled yard debris. So think about all your tree trimmings and all those clippings going to a place that mulches them and turns them into bagged mulch would significantly reduce the pressure on our landfills. We've got to stop sending organic materials to the landfill as much as possible. In my case, with my lawn care series that I teach up here, We've got to stop sending grass clippings to the landfill, guys. Mulch them, leave them on the yard. It is our number one source of organic matter for lawns is our grass clippings. Recycle those nutrients back into the lawn. Yes, there are a few opportunities where you need to bag grass clippings, but the vast majority of the time, chop them up, chop and drop, chop and leave them on the lawn. Okay, if you're following proper lawn management, that you guys are going to learn next week, you should not have any issues leaving those grass clippings on the lawn. And that's material that's not going to start filling up our landfills. Okay. We don't need to build any more trash mountains. No matter how I drive to work, and I have about an hour drive, I can either drive by the landfill in Princeton or I can drive by the one in Melissa. Okay. Neither one of them are particularly nice to look at. And on certain days, they don't smell great either. So we need to try our hardest and encourage the public. You guys, as future master gardeners, encourage your neighbors, encourage the public you interact with to not send organic material that doesn't have to be to our landfills. Try to use it in your neighborhood. Okay. If we could do all these things, if we could adopt Earthkind, widespread. Here's some numbers from just the city of Dallas. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. If we adopted Earthkind across the city of Dallas, and these numbers, they're probably 4 to 5 years old, so they're probably even bigger than this now. We could have conserved 27.5 billion, with a B, gallons of water. I find that difficult to fathom. 27.5 billion jugs of milk set out somewhere. That is an unreal amount of water. Okay. Could have a little over 3 million potentially harmful fertilizer applications. That is over 3 million opportunities for somebody to screw up. Okay. Somebody to buy a bag of fertilizer and get done and have a little bit left in the bag and go, I don't want to store this. And they just go put it out, which might not seem like that big of a deal, you know, and you know what? On a micro scale, if Brad over fertilized his yard, put an extra couple pounds of nitrogen out, honestly, probably doesn't impact the environment a bit. But if me, my neighbor, everybody in our cul-de-sac, everybody in our neighborhood, the 3 neighborhoods that are around my neighborhood, and so on, suddenly that little tiny decision is turned into a big whacking great decision. Okay. So if we can reduce those applications, those are all opportunities that are gone for somebody to make a mistake, to make a bonehead mistake. Okay. 2.86 million potentially harmful pesticide applications. Sadly, many pesticide applications put out, they're not even really warranted. You know, I know a guy, he's waging war on flies. He's losing, just FYI. He keeps spraying around his doors to kill flies. And I keep trying to tell him that, you know, the neat thing about flies is they fly. So even if he does kill some, they're just going to fly in from somewhere else. So maybe the solution for that, as unsightly as they are, to put up the little catchers, the little fly catcher cage things, as opposed to spraying a broad spectrum insecticide. That's that thought process that we have with Earthkind is, man, I am tired of the stinking flies. I'm tired of them coming in my house every time I open the door. How am I going to solve this? Well, I could spray, but my county extension agent said I'm not going to have much impact because of the way they stand. Maybe I should go with some traps instead. That's that sort of thought process. What is the best way to solve a problem that's going to have the least impact on our environment? Okay, that is Earthkind. Imagine if Earthkind was adopted across the entire state of Texas. Those numbers I said earlier were from Dallas, probably 5 years ago. Imagine the entire state. Imagine the entire state. That is absolutely mind-boggling what the difference could be. Extraordinary water conservation. Truly outstanding protection for air and water quality. Okay, so I'm going to get to your questions here in a minute, but I really want to thank Dr. Steve George. He and his wife, Brenda, brought Earthkind to the world, and there are dozens of my colleagues within AgriLife that are working on EarthKind across the state of Texas. And they all need to be thanked as well. I'm standing on their shoulders. I haven't been around that long, guys. Okay. There's been a lot of work that's been done before my time in extension. So I want to thank all of them, providing me with all the publications and resources that I needed to put this together for you guys today. I really appreciate that. Steve would probably strike me down if I did not tell you guys that EarthKind is a federally registered trademark of Texas AgriLife Extension Service and Texas A&M University System. It's one of the very few trademarks that we actually have, and we guard it zealously. Okay. So there's my contact. I'm going to leave that up for you guys. And now I'm going to start answering some questions until we either run out of questions or run out of time. So superstar suggestions for shrubs. Sadly, Brandy, I'm not really your dude for that. And a lot of that's going to come down to region. So I need you to answer a question. Where are you located and what part of Texas is it? And I'll move on to the next one while you answer that. Why don't you hear more about using grass clippings as mulch? So grass clippings as a mulch can pose some challenges. On one front, and my mother has mulched with grass clippings in her vegetable garden for years, and I keep telling her to quit, and she won't stop. Grass clippings can often bring pests in with them. As silly as it might sound, plenty of our creepy crawly insects, they have trouble navigating mulch sometimes. So they can actually, mulch can kind of be a very weak insect barrier. Grass doesn't stop anything. There are plenty of insects that eat grass, so it can sometimes attract them, which can be problematic. Grass clippings can also form a very dense mat, which is not just problematic as a mulch, but it can be problematic in compost piles, home compost piles. Essentially, your grass, which tends to be very, very moist, as it sits there, it will compact itself down and it can form a mat that is very impermeable. Struggles to let water in and out and can struggle to let air in and out. And when you do that, you can make an anaerobic environment underneath it. So in a compost pile, if you use too much grass clippings, you can sometimes wind up with a pile that you'll notice it. You'll start getting sort of that ammonia bite where it's a sharp in your nose smell, or it'll start smelling sulfury, rotten eggs type deal. That's generally an indicator that there's a lack of oxygen. And sometimes it's because those grass clippings have compacted so tightly, there is no air. So in a compost pile, the solution is just to fluff it up some and aerate it, and then work in more brown stuff, work in more carbon to try to give it some structure. But in a landscape, you've just got to be careful that it doesn't compact like that. And when it dries out, the flip side of when it dries out, it can blow away. I've had that happen too. Somebody actually emailed me one time, and it was one of those tricky ones as an agent. My neighbor did blah, 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 blah. Those are always the most difficult ones because you just have to say, well, I'm real sorry to say that, but you need to focus on what's in your control. Oh, we're going to talk to your neighbor. Their neighbor had actually mulched with grass clippings, which was fine until it got dry and the grass clippings kept blowing across the yard and onto their front porch. And they got tired of sweeping their front porch. So that's something else to consider. You can use them as a mulch. They're not always the best option. I think the shredded hardwood mulch is better. And the best thing to use grass clippings for is to mulch them and leave them in the lawn. That is the best use for grass clippings in a landscape, in my opinion. If your leaves have seeds on them, should you use them? I'm assuming tree leaves. So the leaves themselves should not have seeds on them. But that brings up an interesting point. I am going to answer your question this way. You don't want to mulch or compost materials that contain weed seed. So let's say let's say you are bagging your lawn one time because you want to go through and vacuum up the King Ranch blue stem seed heads that are up in there, or the Dallas grass has all gone to seed, and you're going to run your mower and bag it, essentially vacuum that stuff up. Don't go put that bag of stuff in your compost pile because you're not going to get hot enough to kill that weed seed. Now, I told you way early on that if you buy a bag of compost or something from the store, it's been pasteurized. It has. It's been cooked. And part of that cooking process is killing any weed seed that is in there so that you don't introduce weeds to your landscape. Your home compost pile is not really going to get hot enough to do that. Okay. So the answer to your question is you don't want to use materials in your landscape that contain weed seed in. Okay. I actually answered this question a couple of days ago. Somebody using oak leaves, and of course they've got all the acorns and stuff in their yard too. And what I told them is if you use your lawnmower with a mulching blade and you vacuum up the leaves into the bag, you're probably, what acorns you do suck up, you're probably going to grind them up and destroy them with the lawnmower. So you probably don't have to worry about them sprouting in your landscape. However, if they do, they're a tree. Cut them off. Cut it off, you're done. Or yank it out of the ground. Easy peasy. You solve it. But grass weed seed, other weed seed, you don't want to use materials that could possibly be in your landscape. The difference between humus and compost. Okay, so compost, how to answer this. Here's how we're going to answer that. Through the power of technology, guys. I'm going to actually pull up the definition of humus. So humus, as I said, when you have good fully finished compost and you rub it in your hands, you're going to be left with a thin film of humus. And it's material that's been broken down to where it resists further breakdown. So compost, think of it in tiers to where you have compost and you're looking at it and you might vaguely be able to tell what that compost was made of. All right. When it's fully finished, the materials should be broken down to a point that you can't really determine what it was made out of. You shouldn't see sticks and twigs in it per se. You shouldn't see chunks of material. Humus is compost that's broken down even further to that. It has been broken down to a point that the only way you're going to break it down further is through chemical changes. Okay. So imagine a beetle is eating your compost. It's grinding it up and it's eating it and it's excreting it out the back. Once it gets to your compost, that material gets to a point that grinding it up and eating it is grinding it up physically is not going to make it any smaller. You have now reached humus. Okay. So from a landscape standpoint, from a soil building standpoint, I prefer compost because you want the microbes, you want those creatures in your environment doing that to those materials. Okay. Can you use humus in your landscape? Yeah, it's fine. That's absolutely fine. I think it tends to be a little bit more expensive than compost. Not totally sure. I think it always depends on what's on sale. But I would stick with using compost. That's what we used in the research trial, so Extension can stand behind that with the science. But if you have compost, eventually you're going to have humus, if that helps make that sense. Compost is like the step before. And it's not a one day you have compost, the next day you have humus. No, it is gradual over time across this. Okay. Can I speak to using root stimulators and fertilizer for new or established trees? Okay. So I will say for new, if you're going to plant a tree and plant a shrub, you should not have to use a root stimulator and you should not have to use a fertilizer. In fact, I don't believe the Texas A&M Forest Service recommends putting a fertilizer in when you are planting a tree. I encourage you to go to the Texas A&M Forest Service website and look through their tree planting guide and follow those recommendations. Okay. Also, when you're planting shrubs, I think about shrubs like they're little small trees, and I manage them accordingly. Okay, I just think I'm like little miniature trees. All right, Fort Bend. Okay, all right. Fort Bend County for the shrub question. So just southwest of Houston. All right. So I'm assuming you guys are zones, you zone 9? We'll have a look. USDA zone, hardiness zones. Sorry, I'm on the interwebs over here. Or it goes the other way. Y'all are zone 7. I always forget which direction the numbers go. Let's see here. No, y'all are in the 8s, I think.
Hey, we're zone 9.
Okay, so you are zone 9. All right, no, I was going the right direction. I started to second guess myself. Okay, so you guys are in a very interesting spot because you're along the coast. So you guys also have to start thinking about salt tolerances because hurricanes are a thing. So I'll tell you for the purpose of today's presentation, I don't really have an answer for you. The answer to your question is you're going to overlay your ecoregion, which I think you guys are Gulf Coast, your ecoregion, your hardiness zone, and look at your salt statistics and start looking through plant variety, plants that fit within that. Okay. Yeah, that question is a big question. If you want, shoot me an email, or I would argue probably shoot David Rodriguez an email about that and see about superstar recommendations for shrubs. Because we could go into evergreen, not evergreen, and that fun stuff. That's a big question. Aren't grass clippings thatch? They are until they compost. Ooh, man, now I got to pull up another presentation. Answer that. Hold on one second. All right. We're going to look up Earthkind lawn care real fast. Once it loads. So we're going to talk about thatch. And I always get that answer. You guys see that slide? So thatch is a layer of undecomposed organic material that builds up between the soil surface and the actively growing vegetation. That's this little section right here. Okay. Now this dark stuff down here, the mat, that's compost. That's the good stuff. Now, this area here can be problematic. This picture is from the University of Minnesota. Generally speaking, down here in Texas, we do not get cold enough to stop microbial activity year round. They do up north. There are times of the year where the microbes, it's too cold, they don't do their job. Down here, we generally don't deal with thatch problems. There are some instances where you can see thatch build up, okay? And you guys can pick Potter's brain on this, how he feels about it too, okay? If you are following the proper mowing procedures, which means the 1/3 rule, you're removing no more than 1/3 of the lawn at one time, the above ground vegetation at one time. You are avoiding excessive nitrogen fertilization, so you're not growing way too much grass at one time. So you're not adding too much material at one time. You should not have thatch problems. Okay. The one exception to that is probably zoysia grass. And zoysia cellularly is just a tougher grass that takes longer to break down than the others. Zoysia, you may tend to see more thatch buildup than Bermuda grass or Bermuda grass or St. Augustine or some of the other grasses you guys have down on the coast. But normally, even with zoysia grass, there's a fertilization problem too. People are over fertilizing their zoysia. They're treating it like Bermuda grass, and they're growing way too much of it. You cannot fertilize zoysia grass like you do Bermuda or St. Augustine because you can grow too much grass. You can grow more grass than the microbes can break down at one time. But typically speaking, we don't have thatch problems in Texas. Not if we're managing that lawn correctly. Okay. But yeah, that's all thatch is. So yeah, you're sort of correct. Grass clippings are thatch until they turn into this mat. And that mat, that is the compost. So if you look at this picture and let's overlay this idea into a landscape. Think of that as your mulch. And that is the layer of mulch that's broken down and turning into compost that's getting worked down into the soil. It's the exact same concept. The only difference is with thatch, remember I said grass clippings can compact themselves very, very densely to where you can't let air and moisture through? The difference between something like this and hardwood mulch, it's going to be porous. So it's going to let air and moisture in and out of it easily. Okay? Good question. How and when should we use fertilizer on our St. Augustine and Fort Bend? That's a question for next week. That's a question for next week. That's good though. We're going to end at noon. We're going to get out early. Get your questions in. Hopefully you guys have seen that Earthkind is easy. The actual concepts of Earthkind are very easy. They're common sense stuff. And we need to be encouraging the public all across the state to follow Earthkind. Whatever aspects of Earthkind they can follow. Brad is a big believer in baby steps. If we can just convince somebody to do one or two of these concepts, I'm a happy camper. Let them start small. Introduce them to some of our Earthkind plants. Introduce them to the research. And then let them baby step their way along. Let them have some success. Success builds success. And let them feel their way into it. What we don't need to be doing is giving off the perception that Earthkind is an all or nothing. It's you either do, go whole hog, or you're not invited. We don't want to do that. We want to welcome as many people to the Earthkind family as we possibly can. All right. So whatever folks are willing to accept, whatever they are willing to do is going to help solve our problems and help achieve those Earthkind goals. Okay. So cool. You guys have had great questions. Great questions. Thank you so much for that. This is the first time I've given this presentation without a live audience like in the room with me. So it's very challenging not getting direct feedback from you guys. So hopefully we've been okay today. But with that, Jayla, I think I am finished.
Well, thank you so very much. This has been awesome. Again, I'm going to encourage everybody, if you do have questions, please feel free. I'm fine if you unmute, if that's easier, or type in the chat. Brad, thank you so much. I have not heard your presentation, and so this was it was incredible. It was a breath of fresh air. Thank you for joining us. I'm totally going to pick on you for every single class from
cool.
Prepared. With that said, I'm going to give our people a few more minutes while I do a few wrap up, just little comments. I should be able to download this presentation and have it added to the website no later than Monday, hopefully today though. But our next class is our turfgrass talk with Michael Potter. He is the agent in Montgomery County. That is next Thursday. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm trying to stall here to see if you have any other questions. But with that said, I believe we are done for today. Thank you for the extra time back. Like Brad said, some of these concepts are they're straightforward. They're easy to understand. And so I do hope that maybe you go back and read the handbook and continue to learn more and more about those Earthkind concepts and principles. When I first started here at Extension many, many years ago, this was kind of a new thing. Earthkind was kind of what we were hanging our hat on, because we know that Earthkind principles are solid. They work. And so I'm so thrilled that this is continuing and growing and becoming a greater part of what Master Gardeners teach and what we do. So again, one last time, thank you, Brad, so much for sharing your expertise with us. Okay, everyone, unless you have questions for me, I believe we're done for today. Thank you all for being here. And with that said, have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good one. Take care.